Some of you call me the Martyr of Cain. It is one of the many appellations I have worn in my 1,000 years as one of the undead. I hope those 1,000 years convince you of my bona fides. My position is not an empty appeal to my own authority. My voice is the voice of one who has seen firsthand the tumults of ages. I myself lit fires and drank blood in Silchester when the Anarchs rebelled. I myself touched the faces of the eldest, have worn shackles in its cathedral. The world is ever changing, and the damned must change with it. The Sabbat change with it. Centuries ago, our tools were blood and fire. Tonight, many of us continue to wage war with those same weapons, and the mortal world once took up fire against us in return. Tonight, we have our backs broken by our sires, grandsires, our hearts pierced by mortal hunters, hunters who themselves know that wooden stakes and torches, while still effective, may give way to more effective tools. Swarms of death-spitting homunculi that hover in the sky, weapons that outpace the rending of life that even the hoary Khaldun can coax from the ground. The mortals have once again taken up fire. Our sires and grandsires likewise roar their fires against us. You have read the book. You know the signs. Our blood and fire do not hold back the night from our vengeance. Fire is inadequate to illuminate the night for any true duration. Our dominion will not be realized by calling upon the same blood and fire we wielded against superstitious peasants as they shuddered in their crofts. Our dominion will not be realized by seizing domain and reclining on its thrones like a pasha, like a Camarilla crow. We shall realize our dominion not by lingering upon what we are, but by heeding what we must become. The damned form, this Cainite form, is but a chrysalis. It is mutable, mere flesh, mere clay. We have left our mortal clay behind, but our journey does not end with these vile bodies. We must then ourselves become the night. We must become, for such is the will of Cain. Greetings, Cainites. I am Voivode Maquette, and welcome to our world of darkness. And continuing the tradition of everything frickin' happening at once, I don't mean to sound bitter. I'm just very tired. This morning I took Serendipity Weird, the player of Dawn, and my love interest, to the airport, so she could catch a flight at like 3-something in the morning. I had planned on coming home and taking my son to school. I planned on coming home, taking a nap, taking my son to school, and then sleeping for the rest of the day until I had to pick him up, and then we had game tonight and all that stuff. So that was the plan. However, 2 people sent me a copy of the PDF for the Sabbat guide for V5, and I promised that once I got a copy of it, we would dive into this thing, look at it together, and I would tell you my thoughts. And I'm not a liar. Maybe I'm on honorable accord. Not sure. So, either way, here we are with my coffee, with my glass of ice water. Oh my god, the cold and the hot juxtaposed. Amazing. And we are going to take a look at this. This is probably going to be a rather long video. I will get this up as soon as I can, but it is a very busy day because not only do I have to pick up my son who also has an appointment after school, I've got game tonight, and there's no way in hell I'm not running that game tonight. Especially since one of the players is bringing over a lasagna, and yeah, I'm taking advantage of that. So let us take a look at this beautiful book given to us by the World of Darkness Game Studios. All right, people. So here we are inside our look at the Grand Vampire the Masquerade cover art for the Black Hand Sabbat. I believe this is supposed to be Lucita, our beautiful Lasombra, who last time I checked had joined the Sabbat and taken the place of authority after destroying her sire, Cardinal Moncada. So let's just take a look at what we got here. Black Hand, source book for Vampire the Masquerade. Yes, we were looking at the PDF version of this because it's on my computer, obviously. When I read the preview of this, it really felt like they were pushing towards the idea that we know that the Lasombra left because when they got to the Gehenna War, they saw what they think is their antediluvian, still alive and kicking after they believe they had killed it. And they realized that there's no way on Earth they could win. The nihilists of the Lasombra are actually more Darwinists, more survivalists than anything else. And they chose to adapt and survive under the guidance of the Amici Noctis and join the Camarilla, because the Camarilla are adept at hiding. So we know that much. We know that the Tzimisce seem to be having more of a anarch bend, which I'm not 100% against. I kind of saw them joining the Camarilla just to screw with the Lasombra. Like seeing them as traitors, so hypocritically they also quit the Sabbat just to join the Cam to cause problems. But I can also see them joining the Anarchs because, I mean, they were the Anarch movement. Like, the Brujah definitely have the passion and the spirit to have carried the movement. But if not for the Tzimisce and the practice of the Vaulderie, there's no way on earth the Anarch movement would have gone as far as it had in the Dark Ages before the setting of the Camarilla. So I kind of assumed the way that things were going, and I was actually, I can't say assumed, I was actually more hoping that the way that this was going was that the Panders had taken over the Sabbat completely and made it so that if you were in the Sabbat, you dropped your clan. The idea of you are a self-made Catif, and I would actually have to say a self-made Pander at that point since you're Sabbat. But the idea of you acknowledge your clan, therefore you're acknowledging your antediluvian, you're an enemy to the Sabbat, kind of made the thing. So that gave me the idea that the Tzimisce would be too proud to give up their moniker as Tzimisce. And that would be one of the big reasons why they left, because they were just outnumbered by the clanless. So let's jump into this and see exactly what we got going. I enjoyed this introduction. I kind of wish it was signed by somebody, because this really does seem like it's written under one person. I am assuming that it's written under Lucita, because 1,000 years and she was pretty damn old. But let's we got our table of contents, which gets into all the fun stuff. I'm just excited about getting into this. This is a long table of contents. Introduction. Let's go ahead and read this. It's not long. So, we got a quote from Oscar Wilde here. We are each our own devil, and we make this world our hell. Beautiful quote. No sect evokes such fear at its mention, such revulsion at its ideologies as does the Sabbat. The self-styled sword of Cain wages a war of ages, a holy war, a Gehenna war against the legendary progenitors of the clans, the Antediluvians. Citing the Book of Nod, the Sabbat seek to avenge the ancient betrayal of Cain by his wayward childer, seeking nothing less than the destruction of the Antediluvians and the subjugation of the mortal world to a brutal hierarchy with vampires at its apex. Other sects regard the Sabbat as heretical at best and apocalyptic at worst. Some outright deny the existence of the antediluvians, proclaiming them myth, allegory, or centuries dead. Others regard them as torpid, far distant, or irrelevant in the modern nights. That's exactly what drives the fear of the other sects have of the Sabbat. Not only do they prosecute a fanatical agenda, they do so with little regard for themselves and with the conviction of an era long past, a time of long night. Now, that's very true. I mean, that's seriously one of the things that scares the Sabbat. And screw anybody who says that the antediluvians aren't a danger because they're torpid. Dumbass people wake up from torpor. And when they do, they're hungry. And everybody knows what happens when somebody's that old. Human blood just don't cut it anymore. And they're going to have to start draining you. If you believe that the antediluvians exist and they're in torpor, and you're not afraid of them, then you have not been paying attention. So we have the how to use this book, which is actually relatively short. Let me go ahead. Here is the most important sentence in this book. The function of the Sabbat and Vampire the Masquerade stories is to threaten the status quo. The presentation of the Sabbat for the 5th edition of Vampire is as antagonist. The sword of Cain is undeniably a monstrous evil that even the kindred fear. A sect of vampire supremacists who set aside the perspectives of the still living, believing themselves to be more than mortals. This manifests as deliberate efforts by the Sabbat to crush individual identity and reshape it to the sect's own apocalyptic ends. Ultimately, Sabbat vampires don't have a choice in many of the actions they take. In giving themselves to the beast, they set aside that central riddle of the kindred condition. One of the core ironies, or hypocrisies, if you will, of being Sabbat is that it attempts to overthrow oppression through fanatical servilities to Cain. As members of the Black Hand, Cainites yield individuality, ambition, and autonomy. They are blood-bound, indoctrined, completely de-individuated, and instilled with hatreds to which they turn no critical thought. To be clear, there are no systems or suggestions, including herein, for portrayals of the Sabbat as player characters. This book includes discipline powers, details for Sabbat rituals, information on the paths of enlightenment, etc., with the intention that storytellers will use them to create compelling stories around opposing the Sabbat. I can understand the desire, or the intent, I should say, that the World of Darkness has for this book. This book is meant to be made for storytellers to make proper antagonists for their characters. We are going to look at this and see if there's any reason why we can't turn this into us as player characters, making antagonists against storyteller characters instead. Or a split game where you have a Sabbat faction and a Camarilla faction, or an Anarch faction, or whatever. There is, I don't think, any reason why we wouldn't be able to do that. But we will look at this and we will see that on our own. I love this title right here, Build Your Own Medieval Death Cult. This isn't that long. I'm going to read it. The Sabbat has many faces, but the single guided philosophy. One of the most important things to consider about the Black Hand is that it is not a monolith. It's decentralized, even fragmented, to the same degree that the Anarchs are. And since it's actively fighting the Gehenna War, Sabbat rates of final death are even higher than those of the other sects. What's true of the Sabbat tonight, even locally, might not survive past the sunrise. The result is that the Sabbat is a sect only in that it has a common cause and a canon of specific rituals that unite it in packs. That aside, the Sabbat is extremely parochial. The nature of those pacts, the responsibilities of the pacts, spiritual leaders, whether or not those leaders themselves have superiors, or if anyone pays them heed, all of these vary radically by location and by manifestation. One might encounter a pack of Sabbat committing grandiose diablerie in a Baroque cathedral of flesh, or one might find a pack reduced to its last two emaciated members, desperately working blood sorcery in order to poison the frenzied elders about to drink them dry. The Sabbat in your domain might be all that remains after a gore-spattered raid by hunters in this area of the Second Inquisition, or it might be holed up in a cellar of Buenos Aires veterinary clinic, trying to bring back a fallen packmate from torpor. Remember, there's nothing preventing players from knowing the information presented in this book. Where the mysteries and personalities emerge is in how you use the Black Hand as a storytelling tool. Challenge the status quo. If it helps, think of the Sabbat as something other than a sect entirely. A desperate mob of blood war revolutionaries with regional strengths, activities, and methods of tearing down ancient tyranny. So basically as like uber anarchs. And that's truthfully, that's never been further from, or that's never been closer to the truth, truthfully, than to say uber anarchs, because they are effectively what the anarch movement became, radicalized further than any Brujah had ever considered, because they are loyal to Cain. And I actually, this is not deterring me from the idea of saying that their player characters can be made from this book at all, but it is the idea that the Sabbat is that splintered. And if you think about it, they lost Mexico City, which was their capital. Their elders are dying at an extreme rate. We have the capability of having some very messed up stories that could tell some very dramatic and amazing stories. We have a nice little thing here about respectful play, consent and respectful play. Vampires deal with mature themes, blah, 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 blah. Read that. I do highly suggest it. All right, so we have a Sabbat lexicon here, which is amazing. It talks about the Octorius Rite, the recognized canon of Sabbat, the set of high rituals prescribed by the Sabbat to heed, the Black Hand, the Sabbat, brothers and sisters of Cain, the Sabbat, Cainites, a vampire, one of the progeny of Cain, used among the Sabbat to the exclusion of kindred, which the Black Hand derides as a soft appellation. That's actually another thing. I love the effect on my players by using the word Cainite over kindred when it comes to dealing with elder vampires. In my game, I have an elder Tzimisce. He's an old clan Tzimisce. He was never actually part of the Sabbat, named Ivan Vassell. And the first time I said the word Cainite using him, the eyes widened, and you could tell if we were not sitting at a table, there would have been people who stepped back, which was fun. Let's see. Cold War, intrigue, spycraft, and other subtle movements against the servants of the Antediluvians, usually waged to destabilize domains where non-Sabbat sects claim dominance. Okay, that's what Cold War is. Gehenna War, the eternal struggle in its most urgent form, the resistance against the rising of the Antediluvians and their servitors. Hot War, active fighting against the Antediluvians in the Gehenna War. Ignoblius Rite, the local or pack-specific rites created by individual packs or domains to establish community or sanctify behavior. Packs, a Sabbat coterie, almost always reinforced with the ritus of the Velderi. Pack priest, the individual or tactical leader of a Sabbat pack. That's interesting, actually. Now that I'm looking about it, the word ductus has been completely removed from this. Ductus used to be the default leader of a Sabbat pack, and now they have the spiritual and tactical leader of the Sabbat pack being the pack priest. That is interesting, having the tactical leadership being put on the priest as well. Path of Enlightenment, a mental, emotional, and spiritual condition. Path of Enlightenment, a mental, emotional, and spiritual conditioning that supplants humanity, usually with an intent of heightening the priorities of vampiric supremacy. So in other words, brainwashing. That brainwashing, however, will probably help you survive through the nights, even though I find that V5 humanity is a lot more stable for long-term vampire existence than any other version of humanity that has existed so far. Rite. Rituals forming the Sabbat Catechism. Singular ritus or rite. Sabbat. The Sabbat is a singular it when referring to the sect. Its members are a plural they, but Sabbat can also refer to members. One can be a Sabbat of the Sabbat, not that such a phrase would be spoken frequently. This is very much like the idea of Fight Club. If anybody has ever seen Fight Club, no one has a name in Project Mayhem. You are all Tyler Durden. Or actually, you could actually look at this more of a modern take on it. Look at The Walking Dead with Negan. Everybody in the group is Negan. Everybody in the group is Sabbat. Shovelhead, a fledgling Sabbat vampire generally embraced in mass to serve as frontline fodder in an immediate conflict, may or may not have been dumped into a mass grave after being clubbed over the head with an actual shovel. We used to call them pings. Shovelheads. Sword of Cain, the Sabbat. I love how a lot of these are just like Black Hand, the Sabbat. Sabbat, the Sabbat. Sword of Cain, the Sabbat. I like how a lot of them actually are just the Sabbat. Brothers and Sisters of Cain, the Sabbat. That actually fits into that whole cult lifestyle. The fact that everything is the Sabbat. Thin-blooded vampires of especially high generation whose blood carries little to no indication of their lineage. The time of thin blood, when these vampires are present, is one of the omens of Gehenna, presaged in the Book of Nod. I actually wonder how the Sabbat would view thin bloods, because on one hand, I can see them going, oh, they're harbingers of the Gehenna, let's destroy them. But on the other hand, I can see them going, you are pure, not clan. You are not tainted by the clans, therefore you should join us. I can see the Sabbat actually taking in thin bloods for that reason. Maybe not sect wide, but I can see at least a pack running around doing that. Valdery, a Sabbat ritual that shatters blood bonds and reinforces loyalty among pack members. I really hope the Valdery is in this book, like details on that one. Vinculum, a specific type of blood bond that exists among members of a pack, subverting singular blood bonds. Vinculum. I've always pronounced that wrong. Vinculum. Vinculum. I like the sound vinculum, but if anybody actually has the proper way of pronouncing that, let me know. A specific type of blood bond that exists among the members of a pack, subverting singular blood bonds. Plural. Vincula. I don't know. The idea of the Sabbat not having that centralized government where they meet up at least once a year in Mexico, and I mean, it always seemed a little bit too big, truthfully. But the idea of like what's going on now that they don't have a regent, or if they do have a regent, who is the regent? Is it Lucida? You know, I mean, there's so much going on here. Oh, look at that art. I love the fact that he's got a shovel hanging overhead. Looks kind of like a freaking Tusken Raider. He's obviously a priest of some kind giving a sermon, getting everybody worked up. Possibly he's about to announce a shovel party. Setting fire. Nice. Okay. Now this seems to be going over the idea of the whole medieval death cult thing. I do need to read this thing all in its entirety, but I don't know. If anybody is interested in that, look at this artwork. Seriously, look at this artwork. This stuff is beautiful. Look at this. Look at that picture. That's beautiful. I love the whole, like, in front of a busted up church narrative thing that they're going with. I think it's a beautiful story just looking at it. Soldiers in the Gehenna War. Shattered domains. See, this is actually something I'm interested in. In correlation, the Sabbat itself holds little domains in the conventional sense, whereas it once claimed and contested territories like Anarchs and Camarilla. Tonight, the Sabbat domains often have a strange feeling absence of Cainites in them. Since so many obey the beckoning, domains of the Black Hands are often underpopulated, at least in terms of empiric presence. This isn't always the case, however, and no few domains experience huge surges and mass embraces as the frontline commanders of the Gehenna Crusade demand fresh conscripts and plunge into the battle with the Antediluvians. The way that they're saying this is very poetic and very beautiful. I like the idea of that. This book might as well, this is Left Behind. These are the vampires that did not go. And I can see how a lot of the elders of the Sabbat, a lot of the people who had the higher positions within the Sword of Cain would have succumbed to the beckoning. And then the younger warriors, possibly the Paladins and the Templars, would have gone gong-ho into fighting. So, yeah, I can actually kind of understand the idea that there is no centralized government within the Sabbat anymore when you take into consideration everything that's going on with the Gehenna War plotline. And I can understand that the Gehenna War plotline probably was specifically brought in for two main reasons. One, get rid of your damn elders so that nobody can play an elder. And two, get rid of the Sabbat so nobody wants to play Sabbat. But the thing is, nobody is going to stop wanting to play Sabbat. And bringing them back as antagonists on this thing is also one of those things. Look at this guy. Oh my god, look. Look at that. Can you see the face in this guy's coat right here? He is definitely wearing a robe made out of human flesh. So let's see what is this legacy of brutality. The horrific result is undeniable. The Black Hand luxuriates in cruelty. Given that it seeks to suborn human compassion, this cruelty can take many forms, such as the wanton destruction of street gang unleashed, or the consummate viciousness of a sculptor who works in the medium of pain. That's beautifully put. Feeding the beast. The Sabbat is a sect forever fighting something or someone, and the constant siege mentally shapes its members' transition from mortal to Cainite. The Sabbat way is not usually one of esoteric ruses and century-spanning schemes. It prefers overt disciplines and brutal force. Cainites prefer to drive into the maw of their foes, slashing and burning the whole way down. I love the writing of this book already. Like, I'm just reading snippets here and there, but like, it reads so well. Like, it's just beautifully put. I'm loving the story that each picture tells. I'm very much into the art of these books, because look at this. Look how beautiful this is. Redemption Methodist Church. Oh my god. I want one of those copies of the Book of Nod, the new reprints, the beautiful ones. Apostates of a cruel church. Paths of Enlightenment. Here we go. Now, Before we get too far into the paths and enlightenments, I want to go over them with a vague amount of detail on this. And the reason why is because I plan on doing a entire thing on the paths of enlightenments, very much like I'm doing with the disciplines and when I did the clan discussions. I want to have something directly on that. So let's go ahead and see what exactly this says. In the final nights, the Sabbat seems at once an unpredictable hive of clashing orthodoxies and a terrible, relentless monoculture. The apocalyptic Gehenna War has crippled its former leadership structure and robbed it of its most potent elders. The most venerable and respected among the Lasombra, once extremely influential in the sect, if not always its heart for centuries, have moved to abandon the Sabbat as a lost cause. Almost the entirety of the Black Hand's former domains have been seized by rival sects, even as mortal hunters and agencies associated with the era of the Second Inquisition harry the sword of Cain at all turns. Tonight, the Sabbat is smaller than it has been since its foundation, fighting a desperate war against many enemy sects, mortal hunters, and the Antagonists themselves. All of which means tonight, Sabbat has nothing left to lose. This chapter includes a number of tools storytellers can use to introduce the Sabbat into their troops' chronicles, from the paths of enlightenment to sect rites to discipline powers and ready to frenzy antagonists. I love that description, ready to frenzy antagonists. If you're looking to get your hands dirty, this is the chapter for you. All right, so this chapter, the apostates of a cruel church, is where we're going to get our details. But if you stop and think about that description also, it says exactly what I was saying before. Like, all of their territories have been taken from them. They are beset on all sides. The Camarilla has become actively fighting against them. The Anarchs are vying for territory. If you think about where the Free States are, the Anarchs are going to be attacking a lot of Sabbat areas too. Not to mention, with the reformation of the Camarilla central government, the way that they are acting now, the Anarchs probably had a lot of time to just rush in and take a lot of the areas that the Sabbat were holding for themselves when they cut ties with those domains and ran off to join the Gehenna War. So that makes a lot of sense. I can see where things would be going. Now let's see. The paths of enlightenment. By codifying the Cainites' relationships with their beast, paths of enlightenment define the Sabbat, both as a sect and individual members. Paths shape how Sabbat vampires interact with the world, how they fight the Gehenna War, how they wield the gifts of Cain to forge the world into their preferred image. Sabbat pacts form around the idea of path observance. In the vast majority of cases, pack members all follow the same path, ministered by each pack priest. This helps not only in focusing pack efforts, but in the cultic subjugation of the individual, which shapes the other sect's perception of the Sabbat as a hive consciousness. Cainites primarily identify themselves by devotion to their paths, while other sects may alleviate their clans as foundations of identity, points of pride, or proof of sectarian enlightenment. The Sabbat has no use for such, and even subverts the very idea of clan. This is a fun paragraph. All I can say is that's a fun paragraph because it kind of backs up the idea that I had, and I always loved things that agree with me. Not true. I actually hate a kiss ass, but I do love coming across things that I find that I have similar mentalities for. The idea of abandoning your clan and going, not what clan are you, but what path are you? In nights past, when I played Vampire the Masquerade as a player, and even as a storyteller running Sabbat, we always had it. I don't think I've ever played in a pack where everybody was in the same path, and that would have been so much easier. Everybody always created their characters and all had different paths, and a lot of the issues that we had is that we didn't have the same ideals. The pack priest couldn't be the leader of a pack. They had to be the second in command, or the pack priest couldn't be the de facto leader of a pack. We had the ductus for that. And the reason is because the pack priest had to be open to understanding all paths of enlightenment. They had to be studious and study so that they could help their pack mates, no matter what path they were, continue to climb up the hierarchy of spiritual evolution to get to the next stage of enlightenment to be better for the Sabbat. And that was so freaking hard to play a character because, like, as a storyteller, I always situated myself in the pack priest position. I always let somebody else handle the day-to-day activities of the Sabbat, because the way things that were handled in a pack prior to this was you had a ductus who was in charge of the pack, you had a pack priest who was in charge of the spirituality, and there was an abbot who was effectively the house bitch who had to clean up everything and get everything done. Usually that was new members or a revenant or something like that. But the idea that the entire pack is just one path would make things so much easier. And that may have been one of the original intentions of the Sabbat, and it was just something that went over our heads because we just wanted to play, and everybody wanted to play something different. And when you stop and think about it, that's not exactly how the cult mindset works. Look at this. She has given herself up to the feeding. And this, I believe, is the, yes, Path of Cain. I like the fact that, much like clans with their clan symbols, the paths now have their own symbols, which is fun. The Nautists or the Devourers. So we looked at this before. I'm not going to read this entire thing because, again, I want to do something. I want to devote a series specifically to the followings of the paths of enlightenment. But I do want to read a little bit of this. The premise of the Path of Cain is to cultivate and refine the power inherent in the blood so that individual vampires can realize their full potential. The idea of becoming closer to Cain. You are a zealot. I played Path of Cain for years. 4 years. With my very first Amitzi, he was on Path of Cain. Everybody thinks that my first Amitzi would, of course, be on Path of Metamorphosis, but no, he was on Path of Cain. And I had a cruel storyteller who, when I had actually, like, I had just built up climbing to the apex of Path of Cain. I was on the 5th level, and I had said something nonchalantly to my storyteller. I love this. I love the fact that, like, you can see how. Sorry, I'm getting lost because of the art. I said something nonchalantly to my storyteller one time. I said, you know, if I was truly on Path of Cain, then I would be on humanity because Cain himself was never on a path. And she's like, congratulations, you're on humanity. And I was dumbstruck. I could not believe she did that to me. But I also had a really fun time playing an elder Tzimisce who was he was like 500 years old, because I like to play my elders. And he was like over 500 years old, and he was on humanity in the Sabbat. And I was a bishop at that point in time because we had played the long game. And I had actually taken over the city that I was in. And being a bishop of the Sabbat on humanity, who, no matter what I did, my humanity just kept climbing to the point where I was a bishop of the Sabbat Tzimisce on humanity of 5 eventually. It was ridiculous. I had to maneuver the Sabbat in ways that were not going to damaged my point of views that I had gained from being on humanity, which was a ridiculous premise. But look at this guy. Look at this guy. I'm going to move him over a little bit. Hold on. Boop. There we go. I know I'm stepping outside of the... I just want to take a look at this guy. Look at him. He is practical. Look at that. Look at that. Look at all those pockets. Look at all those pockets. I love the loop of ears that he's wearing. Anyway, let's get on this. The ethics is something that I'm very interested in, primarily because the idea of the ethics are what you're going to want to, if you're doing a player character Sabbat Chronicle. These ethics, in my opinion, should be your Chronicle tenets. If you're playing in a pack where everybody is on the same page, where everybody's in the same path, it's going to make sense. So let's take a look at the Path of Cain's ethics, or Chronicle tenets, in my opinion. Lower one's generation and concentrate the power of one's blood to become closer to Cain, and exalt in the potency it yields. In other words, commit diablerie when you can on an enemy vampire. If you find yourself with the ability to do it, you might take a stain if there's something telling you can't. So think about that. Think about how much trouble you can get into if you need to interrogate somebody. But then you're like, you know what? If I diablerize right, I can just learn everything he already knows. Like this is something that can come up. Partake of all blood, the better to understand the power contained in it, and to build wisdom from its nuances. Again, feed often and a variety of feeding. Try not to feed on the same thing too much often. And the last one, brook no failures from one's leaders. Be prepared to commit diablerie upon them. If their shortcomings, hold the pack back. So in other words, if you need to, eat your pack priest if he's failing to be a proper nodist. I love the concept of, you know that your pack is going to be together. You know that you're going to work with them, that this is family. But you're going to eat your family if they fail you. And again, Chronicle tenets here. You could very well just completely cut out the idea of touchstones. So instead of having 4 to 6 tenets, you only have 3, which drags you down. Another thing is what you could do is what my game did the first time we played a V5 Chronicle. We played Sabbat. And what we ended up doing was taking the ethics of the path as our Chronicle tenets as individual vampires, because yet again, we created characters who were not all on the same path. But then our touchstones ended up being the vampires in our pack. If we did the Valkyrie with anybody, they became our touchstones. And I understand that completely discredits the idea of what a touchstone is, but if you think about it, as a vampire on humanity, your touchstone would be something of humanity. If you have a touchstone that is a vampire, it is because they are representing parts of the Cainite ideal that you hold dear to yourself. So consider the fact that possibly the highest 3 members of your Vinculum could be your touchstones if you want to include that mechanic into a game where you're playing Sabbat. Moving on. Many followers of this path have uncanny mastery of blood sorcery, with a number of powers and rituals virtually unknown outside the Sword of Cain. Animalism, obfuscate, potence, and protean also see frequent use among nodists because of the fighting effectiveness when hunting other undead. Okay, I do want to point this out. When I was first looking at this, I was looking at ways to make a Sabbat character with the idea of dropping clan altogether. How exactly would you build a character if you were not taking in consideration clan? And the way that I did it was the way your disciplines would be founded is based off your path of enlightenment. So there are a couple of different ways you can do that. You could do that, one, by saying, okay, so my predator type gives me my first discipline, and then what my clan foundation was, what my clan was at some point in time, what my ancestral clan would give you a discipline, and then your path of enlightenment would give you a discipline. So this one right here tells you straight out that blood sorcery, animalism, obfuscate, potence, or protean make great disciplines for that. Now, given the fact that there are so many right here, you could very well say that your predator type gives you one and your path gives you two, and literally just use path as your clan all together, which would also give you a very neat variety of vampires in your pack if you stop and think about it. So moving on, we have Path of Cathari. I'm enjoying that like dagger through the goat skull picture here. She seems fun. Yes, Devils of the Flesh. The premise of the Path of Cathari is for its followers to heed the beast as it drives them to luxuriate in what they are, so they can lead no atrocity unperformed. So in other words, hedonism. Hedonism is a fun game when you're playing Sabbat. The ethics are experience every vice being damned affords, from instilling fear in others to performing acts of cruelty to ceding control to the beast. One's role as a creature outside mortal morality is predestined. Accept it and fulfill one's purpose, and lead others into damnation or destruction. Indulge every temptation, give oneself wholly to the wiles of the beast. I love the description of the ethics here, primarily because when you think about Path of Cathari in the older versions, it was like, wow, you're playing a Setite in the Sabbat. Interesting. Or you're playing just a standard hedonist. I don't know how many people I know who are on Path of Cathari just so their characters could have some wild orgy or something like that. But that's a very human thought, isn't it? The idea of having that kind of thing. Now, holding orgies so that you can feed on them is another thing. My idea for this would be the idea of the blood rave at the very beginning of the old Blade movie. Take that into consideration. They were having fun and they were playing with their food. They were indulging in all the wonderful ecstasies that being a vampire can hold. Now, disciplines for this. Many followers of this path excel in physical disciplines to better perform monstrous feats that set them apart from fear mortals. As well, due to the nature of hedonists, infiltrators, and tempters, Cathari finds ample opportunity to use aspects, obfuscate, and presence. I can see that. Potence, celerity, and fortitude, aspects, obfuscate, and presence. Those would be the disciplines that Path of Cathari would love to use. I'm going to say something rather disgusting. Adult warning. If you are under 18, please stop listening. But could you imagine the idea of a vampire who basically screws someone to death using celerity? That would potence and celerity combo to do that to a person, literally split a bitch in half. That would be messed up. Or a female vampire doing the exact same thing. Could you imagine how much damage somebody could do if they really, really wanted to with that kind of thing? Path of Cathari, and you're not even at that point doing it for the pleasure of yourself. You're doing it for the pleasure of killing them in that fashion. Of completely getting that emotional. That would be such an interesting way. What what resonance would you get from a person? How fast does the blood get tainted with resonance shifting when they realize that they're going to die this way? And would it matter to them if you're using celerity and potence coupled with presence to try to do that thing? Could you imagine doing that and pulling Daunt on a person, on your partner at that? It's Path of Cathari would be fun, but this is definitely rated 18 and up, at least, when it comes to that path. Alright, so Path of Death and the Soul. I love how Path of Death and the Soul has a salubri here. I also love this symbol. This is amazing. The idea, necromantists and reapers. The Path of Death and Soul, to me, has always represented the harbingers of skulls. And now that at least the majority of the harbingers of skulls have joined the Hecata, I wonder what we're dealing with. I love the idea of the salubri and the Sabbat. Kind of because of the idea that you don't see warrior clan salubri anymore. Now, there's nothing stopping you from taking everything that you need to be able to use your Obeya and Valor and powers, but also taking like something lethal on top of that. The premise of the Path of Death and the Soul is to study, understand, and master death so that destroyed enemies remain dead. That's interesting because of the idea of how many people could actually come back. Is torpor considered death? That's a very interesting thing. Here is a very interesting doctor, almost. I like the tools here. This is a very interesting picture of a practitioner of death and the soul. I love the art on this. That is very cool. Okay, ethics. Leave no survivors at the conclusion of a violent conflict. Investigate the relics and remains of death. Personal, historical, occult. In order to discern the details of how the conflict ended and its existential outcome. Hasten death's arrival. From humblest insects to much lamented flower of human life. That is a very interesting way of looking at it. So if you were to take these as your chronicle tenets for this path, leave no survivors at the conclusion of a conflict. That makes a lot of sense. If you do end up having a violent interaction, which you're playing Sabbat, you're probably gonna leave no survivors. If you end up leaving survivor, you gain a stain. Could you imagine playing this character, playing a pack on that, leaving and then finding out later that someone had survived, maybe somebody hiding who witnessed the whole thing, and then just like sinking a little bit, feeling that you failed your path, that pit in your stomach that would come back. You'd probably gain a stain. But that does also leave you with the possibility of erasing a stain if you can find them. If you can track that down. Could you imagine an entire story arc being on making sure that you killed every last survivor in a botched attack? That would almost feel like you are the presence of death in a Final Destination movie. Investigate the relics and remains of death. I like that also because you are talking about the existential outcomes of things. Because Path of Bones, which is where this path comes from, it really has a lot to do with the physical processes of death. When you're studying death, you're studying how things rot, how long it takes, what temperature causes the body to do what kind of thing. That you're dealing with a very visceral thing. But with this, you're dealing with the idea of what significance that death has. It's more spiritual. It's more philosophical. And you don't necessarily have to play a violent character to be on this path, per se. Yes, you're going to have to perform violent actions, but it doesn't mean that's exactly what you're going for. Then hasten death's arrival. From humblest insect to much lamented flower of human life. In other words, kill when possible. This is one of those things where if it's easy, if it's not too much problem, like you don't want to let somebody just sit there and die slowly unless you're possibly studying that kind of thing. This is an interesting conflict of ethics, which could be very interesting because it has a lot to do with leave no survivors, yet investigate how people die. There's a lot of interesting things. There's a lot of interesting ways of playing this. So the disciplines for this path, many followers of this path are especially adept at the binding and rebuking uses of Oblivion, as well as developing ceremonies of their own. Auspex, blood sorcery, and dominate also have places in the necromantic arsenal. So in other words, what we're looking at is Oblivion, primarily the necromantic facet of Oblivion, and then Auspex, blood sorcery, and dominate. I like the idea of dominate because you could possibly dominate other people to kill for you in that, and that's a whole new type of death, because is there a difference between somebody being murdered by a monster or a loved one? I can see that being a mentality on there. So if you were going to create a character like this, you could take whatever your discipline for your predator type is, and then you could take one of these listed here. And the idea of taking necromancy, Oblivion, and blood sorcery would be a lot of fun. So let's see. The path of power in the inner voice. The unifiers, the Hollands. I love this symbol here, the whole like sun on a chain kind of thing. And again, beautiful, beautiful picture. This is, the artwork in this book is just flippin' amazing. And I love how visceral this background image is, because at first, when you're looking at it, when you're just passing glance, it kind of looks like fire. But then when you start looking at it, that's fleshy. That's meaty. The premise of the path of power in the inner voice, unsurprisingly, the acquisition of might, by which they can impose their personal will upon the world around them. The idea of seeking power for power's sake. Okay, so the ethics of the path of power in the inner voice. First off, let me just say, I love how this person is dressed and how they're just standing on other people. The reason I want to point that out is because most of the time when you think about power in the inner voice in the Sabbat, I always think Ventru or La Sombra. So when I think about that, I see them wearing like suits and stuff like that. But look at this. This is a more ritualistic, primal interpretation of what this is. In other words, stepping away from the human and going into the bestial. And I love it. So, the ethics. Reward success and excoriate failure, including one's own. In other words, excoriate is to really freaking dig into it, to not let it go. It doesn't necessarily mean punishment, but the idea of really ribbing. This person failed, you're not going to let them forgive that. You failed, you're not going to let yourself forgive that. That could very well turn violent, but it's not necessarily needed. The world around the Cainite exists to be exploited to their benefit. The enlightened Cainites bend it to their will. In other words, shape everything around you to be of convenience to yourself and your pack. Force those who are beneath one's own position into servitude, using all the means at one's command. There is nothing stopping you from doing anything that you possibly can do to get to the top of the hill. Lie, cheat, steal, kill, diablerize, everything. Anything that leads you to improving your personal situation is how you get to the top of this. Disciplines. Many followers of this path focus on social and mental disciplines, the better to convince less willful individuals to perform as the unifier's desires or to force them into compliance. They cultivate their physical disciplines as a close second, the better to prosecute the conflicts in which they inevitably find themselves. Dominate, fortitude, potence, and presence are hallmarks of the unifiers. So that makes a lot of sense. If you take a look at this, dominate, fortitude, presence. You're looking at Ventrue there for the most part. But again, I don't see clan coming into play here. I see the paths replacing clans. Until I read something here that changes my mind, I'm going with it. This is a very interesting photo. I like the fire. I like the sizzling through the broken skin. Pure. This is Burns Pure. This is a very look at this picture. Look at the melted skin. Path of the Sun, the Prometheans kindling. I might be wrong, but I think Path of the Sun might specifically be a path written for V5. So let's check this out. Thin-blooded Cainites don't usually last long in the Sabbat. Either their blood is too weak to see them through the creation rites, or the power differential they experience against more potent blooded vampires put them at a quickly fatal disadvantage, especially at the forefront of the Gehenna War. That hasn't stopped a certain growing subset of thin-blooded Sabbat from testing the limits of the Curse of Cain, however. In the evolving orthodoxy of the Path of the Sun, thin-blooded Cainites and Caitiff are the only vampires truly free from the taint of the Antediluvians. Nodist literature makes no small reference to the thin-blooded, plainly stating that when the thin bloods are present, in this time, Gehenna will soon be upon you. And with the Gehenna War raging nightly, few Sabbat would argue that the event is yet to come. Yes! See, and this is what I was talking about. I can definitely see some thin bloods being part of the Sabbat. I'm loving this. I can really see that. The idea that the Sabbat would take advantage, especially now that their hierarchy has been destroyed. There's no one telling them that thin bloods are bad at that point. And also, with the way that the Camarilla panics at them, that would tell me as Sabbat that, oh, these would be a good weapon against the Camarilla, possibly against the Antediluvians, because they have no control over them. The Path of the Sun is an imperfect path. It is very much unproven, more of an emergent outlook among those fighting at the forefront of the Gehenna War. The practiced almost exclusively among very younger Sabbat. Indeed, it has only very recently come into being with enough rigor for certain priests consider it an actual path. That is very cool. It's a whole new path of enlightenment for V5. I'm so happy about that. The ethics. Let neither one's mortal nor Cainite heritage limit one's potential. Very cool. Which means you can't just write somebody off without taking a stand. You got to let people attempt to better themselves. Destroy Cainites, but never consume them, leaving oneself untainted. You get stains for diablerie. Look at this. It's a Sabbat path against diablerie specifically. I like that. Do not allow other would-be Prometheans to serve the polluted bloodlines of the Antediluvians. If you find out that a bloodline, or if you find out that thin bloods are serving the vampires of other sects, or just serving vampires in general, and not looking out for themselves, destroy them, or at least try to change their outlook. these ethics would make such these ethics make such great tenets when you stop and think about it. And the Sabbat, this game definitely can be played as a Sabbat game. There's nothing stopping us from doing it. Disciplines. The Path of the Sun finds especially frequent use of alchemy, with which the Dustborns have affinity. That makes a lot of sense, and I really, really enjoy this. This is so awesome. Forsaken Paths. The Sabbat spiritual journey is a significant, even defining aspect of sect membership. That said, not all paths of enlightenment followed tonight emerged contemporaneously. Further, not all paths are equally functional or viable in the modern knights. Ideas never die, however, and for all the paths that are inadequate to serve a Cainite's needs, some remain in regional practice. Whether relics of knights past or colloquial traditions, or philosophical aberrations at odds with Sabbat dogma, some of the more marginal paths haven't vanished entirely, and not every path follower is Sabbat. This right here kind of gives you the idea that you could very well play a path not in the Sabbat. You could play a Camarilla or an Anarch that previously was Sabbat. You could come in. How many La Sombra player characters were Sabbat? You'd still be on a path of enlightenment. Consider that. That would also be very, very fun before I get into these paths. Could you imagine the entire game being on like the street code or the gothic or the romance or whatever path tenets you chose for your chronicle, whatever chronicle tenets you chose, and having that one La Sombra or Sabbat who joined your group who does not follow the same rules as everybody else. We used to have this thing in the old games called the weird shit category. And this is something that I picked up from my storytellers. I don't think this is a widespread practice. It's not in any of the books or anything like that. But we always had that one person who came up and said, "Can I play this?" And most of the time you're just like, dude, it's a vampire game. Stop asking me to play a werewolf or a Kindred of the East or a demon or something stupid like that. Stop asking me to play weird shit. And then after a little while we decided, screw it. We have one weird shit category open. The first person who asks to play it, and I trust can play it, can go ahead and play it. And that typically ended up being like the one guy who wanted to play Gargoyle, or the person who came in with Salubri in the older editions. I think that fits better in with V5. But like, there's always that one person who wants to play the strange thing that doesn't actually fit in the setting. This kind of falls into that category. Oh, I want to play a La Sombra that was Sabbat first. Cool. What path of enlightenment were you? Let's see how we can work that in there. Can your character go through the journey of self-discovery to survive within a Camarilla setting on a path, or try to get off a path, if that's even possible? Can you imagine the struggles and ramifications of trying to get off of a path, trying to reverse the brainwashing that the Sabbat did to get you onto a path? That's almost like that's almost like a Golconda story in and of itself. Path of the Beast. Followers of the Path of the Beast do not treat the beast as a separate entity, but as their true self. The Path of the Beast considers the mind a bestial trait standing in the way of the beast. The monsters within replaces the conscious sense. The monster within replaces the conscious self. The monster within replaces the conscious sense of self. Cainites who follow this path tend to become powerful and bestial very quickly. It has fallen out of common practice due to its general inability to prevent Cainites from wassail over the long term. That makes a lot of sense. Now, it doesn't actually get into disciplines or ethics or anything like that, but with that, I don't know. You know what? Let's just go ahead and read all of these. I'm very interested in seeing what this has to do with it. So, regional pacts that follow it can still be found worldwide, both at the front of the Gehenna War and in especially violent domains. So that's all that says. It doesn't go into ethics. It doesn't go into disciplines. Personally, I think the path to the beast ethics would be rather easy to come up with. You can always use the older books that are going to give you the way the ethics worked back then. Just pick the 3 most hectic ethics to go with. But the idea of never spend a night under a roof, give up wearing clothes, stop being human, basically, is going to be your main thing. So it's very interesting how that is mentioned here. The path of honorable accord. The fact that this was taken out is kind of interesting. Rumored to have been practiced even before the foundation of the Sabbat, regional variations that amount to the path of honorable accord emerge from any number of cultural traditions. It has been variously characterized as a spectrum, including a bloody-minded, chivalric perspective practiced by paladins of Cain, to a rigid asceticism, by which the Cainite foregoes any personal comforts to mortify themselves into oneness with the beast. The path has fallen out of common practice among the Black Hand because its precepts often bring it into conflict with the general Sabbat outlook of mortal society. Some Cainites believe that the more one tyrannical Camarilla prince has Some Cainites believe that more than one tyrannical Camarilla prince has followed the path of honorable accord, as great age puts great distance between them and the tenuous humanity. This may be speculation, and surely some number of these anecdotal elders would have heard the beckoning, forcing this path further into the margins as an insufficiently motive perspective, as it seems to be more philosophy than path. I kind of like that. The idea, like, path of honorable accord really does kind of fit as an overlay on top of other paths. Not all, obviously. I don't think Path of the Beast would go well with Honorable Accord, but I can definitely see Path of Cain holding a sense of Honorable Accord. It is a very anachronistic way of life, if you stop and think about it. So that is very neat. That is very cool. Path of Lilith. If my good friend Mirta, I love your name, it's so beautiful. If my friend Mirta is watching this, I'm happy to point this out, because when I think of Path of Lilith now, I think of you. I really do. I think that I do think that your and my viewpoints on certain things don't match. But I do think of you when I think of Path of Lilith. So let's see what V5 has to say. And if you are watching this, I would love to hear from you on your thoughts of this. According to the Book of Nod, Lilith offered Cain succor when he was cast out of the land of Nod. Followers of the path of Lilith venerate the Dark Mother, and some even impute to her the creation of vampires, or mingle the origin of the vampiric species to a shared parentage of Lilith and Cain. Veneration of Lilith often exalts her as a cultivator rather than a destroyer, but at the same time acknowledges that she is the mother of monsters, perhaps even spawning some of the other supernatural creatures with whom vampires share the night. Historically, followers of the path of Lilith had often been accused of heresy in the Cain-centric Sabbat, but the long and complicated relationship between the Path and the Black Hand persists to this night, where her cults can be found. This is a beautiful way of putting out the Lilith idea, or the idea of the Bahari within the Sword of Cain. The only actual new thing that I see on here is the idea of the shared parentage between Lilith and Cain. It makes sense, but I always see Lilins or Bahari or the Lilitu, or however they wish to call themselves. I've always seen them as a we worship Lilith, screw Cain, he's a dick mentality. But I like the idea of the Hail Lilith, Hail Cain mentality. And I actually do see that surviving in the Sabbat a lot better than any other version of the Path of Lilith. So that is a neat thing to take in consideration. And the idea of having that polytheistic look on vampiric origins is interesting, especially for somebody who has a real world pagan background like I do. So beautifully put. I like this. I wish there was more of it, but considering the fact that we do have a Bahari lore sheet and information about the Path of Lilith within Cults of the Blood Gods, I'm not going to complain about lack of information here, because we have it. We have a lot of information on this path already, and it's a good thing. The Killing Time. Antagonists. This right here, I just want to see what this first thing says. To the outside observers, a Sabbat pack acts with frightening coordination, displaying behavior easily mistaken for shared consciousness among its members. Okay, so this is more of how storytellers can work out how your NPCs are going to go on working together. It does make a lot of sense. This sentence right here is a testament to the effectiveness of the paths. That makes a lot of interesting thing. And when you do look at this, I can see what the mentality is, but this could come in handy for creating a Sabbat pack as player characters as well. It goes on to say constructing conflict. This basically just gives you ideas of how to bring the Sabbat into your game. Let's see. The antagonist described here will give numerous sessions and stories worth of conflict. Okay, so then they go on to give us like how to portray paths and things like that, which goes into a lot of look at that. I love the fact that she herself is wearing a collar also. I can kind of see the idea of it breaking into two and she's being led by the dogs, like allowing their beasts to lead her beast in a way. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of these NPCs. We have a bloodhound here, a massive dog made even fiercer by vitae, supernatural conditioning. The bloodhound serves its master by tracking the kindred prey as well as their daylight guardian. Loyal unto death, the bloodhound nevertheless possesses enough cunning and self-preservation to avoid direct confrontation unless the master is threatened. So they even gave it potence. That's very cool. You got your rules on how to actually run that. This is neat because it's a dog ghoul, but not necessarily a hellhound. So that is pretty interesting. Path of Cain tracker. This vampire is tasked with surveying and documenting vampire activity in a prey domain, whether as a rite of passage or as a punishment for failure. Using avian spies to avoid detection, they approach only what they perceive as weak or weakened prey. Desperate to gain recognition among their peers, they might eschew prudence if the opportunity presents itself. That's neat. I want to point that out. That is neat. I would also like to point out that this is a vampire. This is a ghoul dog. So here's a character sheet with animalism, obfuscate, and potence. This is obviously a Nosferatu-based character, given the use here, but it does not have to be. This is somebody on Path of Cain who could be anything. I do love the fact that it does not actually generalize clan. And again, I will state the disciplines here do primarily point in that direction, but it's not set in stone. Path of Cain Slayer. So we got another Path of Cain. Is this, let me see. Oh, okay. These are specifically Path of Cain NPCs. Very cool. Alright, this is not their first siege. Murder incarnate. This Cainite stalks the streets, sewers, and rooftops in their unerring hunt for kindred to consume. Adorned with trophies of their past kills, their hunt is sacraments and holy purpose in one. Oh my god, that is so beautifully written. As somebody who played Path of Cain for a very long time, it's just a very nice thing to see. So this, I'm actually just interested in the idea of what disciplines they're giving to these people. Celerity, Potence, Blood Sorcery, Offuscate. Tell me what clan that is. Bitch can't. You could definitely make up what clan that is if you wanted to, but I love the fact that it's not specified. And in early games, if you look at like the old Chicago by Night book, or the other early stuff before the Sabbat became playable, you might get mention of the La Sombra and the Tzimisce here and there. But like when you see a character sheet, like I think his name was Pierre from the Chicago by Night book, who was Sabbat, they never said what clan they were. And I loved the fact that it was ambiguous. Path of Cathari. I like how it actually tells you use of ghouls and stuff. Mortals not used and discarded by the Catharites. Catharites. I don't know if I like Catharites. Frequently become ghouls. I like the idea of the Sabbat being more ghoul oriented. I really do. Okay, so the honey trap, easy prey and choice vessel, is one convenient package. Few vampires can resist the lure of this victim. The ghoul's blood seethes with a potent mixture of inhibition, suppression, psychoactives, and energizing stimulants, providing an unexpected kick to anyone who feeds on them. Kindred Longdad have even found priapic anguish after a turnabout liaison with a honey trap. While the honey trap can be used to draw out and identify potential vampires, the real use is to awaken selected kindred, making them susceptible to whatever plans the Cathari have for them. Giving them presents. I love the fact that they're giving us a ghoul first with each of these, because the honey trap is such a good idea. The idea of like making it so that somebody's blood is just so damn delicious that like you make Camarilla vampire, Anarch vampires addicted to them so that they're easier to get. Like, and you don't care if they die. I mean, it's going to be a pain in the butt because you're going to have to redo, creation, but that is so cool. I gotta hold on the notes. Sorry. Sating one hunger or more causes an intense rush, as well as a loss of inhibition in the feeding vampire. Treat the effects as a combination of meth and hallucinogens. They must also take a compulsion. These effects last for the rest of the scene, though the Cathari Cainite usually makes their move before that. That is so cool. Could you imagine the idea of setting up like a swingers club or something like that? Something where like the vampires are going to be like, oh, this is going to be an easy way to feed. Go in there, slide in, people are going to want to take you home, kind of things like that. But then they're all tainted by the Sabbat. That's so cool. The Path of Cathari Radicalizer. The Radicalizer is all about the moment. Skirting the edges of the Anarch domain, they attract vampires with a grudge, those who have lost something, or at least believe themselves to have lost something. The Radicalizer promises a reckoning and encourages the disenfranchised licks to act against their oppressors, to hurt them or those they care about, and all in the name of the movement, or your rights as a kindred. Every lick deserves to be what Cain intended them to be, and damn anyone who tries to defang us. I like the term defang. That's fun. Look at this picture also. He's got the widow's peak, the high collar. He's a Dracula. So the Path of Cathari Radicalizer could be used in a couple situations, in my opinion. You could use them either to radicalize the Anarchs, to get them angry at the Camarilla oppressors, or even against their barons, to turn them against each other. Or you could use them in a Camarilla city to turn more people into what they think are Anarchs, when you're actually brainwashing them into the Sabbat. So this is neat. The Radicalizer could actually be considered a recruiter. The disciplines are Auspex, Presence, and Protean. So we're actually looking at almost like a Toreador here kind of thing, who has given into feeding off animals or feeding off other vampires, probably other vampires. Then we have the Vampire, which I'm assuming this is what that picture is. I don't think that's the recruiter or the Radicalizer. The Vampire. Many Cathari revel in the bestial inner nature, but the vampire basks in superficial stereotypes instead, adapting every popular trait from movies and literature. This devil of the flesh takes pride in being an affront to subtlety, as well as any attempt to hide from mortals. Their haven is a decrepit manor, bats included, their wardrobe a selection of Taramedallion capes. Their cellar hosts nightly blood sacrifices to Satan. Strangely, it works. While their fellow Cainites are struck down with hot lead and fire, nobody wants to risk looking stupid by raiding what is obviously a wannabe vampire mansion. I like the idea of the guy who actually can be a vampire, but the hunters won't go after him because they think that he's just nuts or he's involved in a social scene of being a vampire. I think that is hilarious. We've got Dominate, Protean, and Animalism. So we're probably looking at Tzimisce here. That definitely fits in with the Tzimisce. So the guy who decides that I'm going to be a vampire, sleeping in a coffin, dressing in suits. I am a Dracula. I love the idea of I am a Dracula. You mean a vampire? I don't care which Dracula I am. I love that. I love that. Okay, so now we've got our Path of Death and the Soul. So our ghoul here is the Sleeper. That is, if we're still following this framework of ghouls. What does it say about ghouls for Path of Death and the Soul? Yes, they use expertly tailored ghouls. So let's see who this guy is. The Sleeper has worked for many years as an obedient retainer under blood bond to a trusted domitor. They know the ins and outs of their master's affairs, whom they meet, who they fear, and whom they feed. They're unquestionably loyal, at least until the night when 5 cockroaches form a curious sigil on their bedroom floor. Then they will remember their true domitor and regnants. They will open the lead box and spike the drink of their false master's favorite vessel. and wait. So the sleeper is literally a sleeper agent. It's an MK Ultra style situation here where a ghoul belongs to somebody else, but they're placed in the care of another vampire until something sets them off. I really like the idea of how terrifying that is. As somebody who has used ghouls extensively in the past, that's scary. Now we have we've got the same picture from the preview. We have the Path of Death and Soul Piper. Some jobs require personal attention. The Piper scour the streets and alleys of the prey city, one ear forever turned to the susurrus of the dead. They whisper to the victims, the ghosts and specters of those who suffered and died at the hands of their secret undead masters. The Piper promises retribution in exchange for service. Soon they will have an army. So getting into that, we have Auspex, Fortitude, and Oblivion. This is obviously meant to reflect the idea of a Harbinger of Skulls, or a Sabbat version of the Hecata. And it makes a lot of sense for there to be some of them left. But I like the idea of I'm going to go into an enemy city, a prey city. And also, I got to say this, if anybody from World of Darkness actually watches this, I love the term prey city. The idea that you are hunting and feeding off of the city itself is a very poetic way of saying it. But what I was going to say, the idea of somebody going into the city and finding wraiths and specters that were specifically victims of the vampires, to use them, offering them the chance at retribution, at revenge, is that's amazing. I love the idea of that. The whole idea. That's just such a fun character. The Path of Death and Soul Life Crafter. Nothing kills quite as effectively as life. The Life Crafter has dedicated their undead existence to honoring life in all its forms. To perform this single function, their workshop set up in a dilapidated sewing factory. The looms now stretch, sew and knit living hides instead. And the coloring vats bubble with fetid bacterial cultures. Whether coaxing mortality out of microbes and assembling monstrous assemblies of flesh, sinew, and bone, the Necronomist is aware that while death is the final goal, the ends sometimes justify the means. That is nice. And we are looking at Dominate, Protean, Animalism, and Auspex. Hey, look at that. A standard Tzimisce. Look at that. You got your Vicissitude, your Animalism, and your Auspex. This is very neat. I'm assuming, treat the ghoul creations as Schlachta, while enhancing microbes can have any number of effects. I like the idea of getting in deep and dirty with the Vicissitude kind of thing, where you're using this. I like the whole coaxing mortality out of microbes, basically, and it gives the idea down here. I saw it just a second ago. Effects can approach Scorpion's touch. The idea of using microengineering to give your Schlachta something visceral, but that is definitely a Tzimisce, or at least somebody who followed the practices of Tzimisce. Even if they don't call themselves Tzimisce anymore, they are still, in my eyes. We have Path of Power and the Inner Voice, and our first is our ghoul. So the first one we have is the Broken Servants. This ghoul has lost everything. They used to be valued, trusted, and comfortable. Above all, they were important. Their new master has torn the scales from their eyes. They now know that they're filth, fit only to yield their wretched life in one pure act of submission. They will pull the pin the moment they enter Elysium. Ooh. Oh man, so this kind of looks like a suicide bomber, truthfully. It's somebody who has, and this actually looks like somebody who may have been a ghoul for the Camarilla and has broken that trust and now serves the Sword of Cain. So that's pretty cool. Path of Power and the Inner Voice, Knight. They used to call themselves Paladins, but the looks they got made them change their moniker. Immaculately dressed, in dark suit and tie, and with an affected European accent, they would fit right in at a Jason Bourne villain audition, or as the 9th Reservoir Dog. Now, they're part of a pack operation on hostile territory. Their mission, whatever other packs are doing, but better, more vicious, with greater style. This right here, again, regardless of how you see it, whether or not you're playing Sabbat or not, you are the villain. The Sabbat are the villains, because the status quo is the Camarilla. You're trying to tear that down. Even if you're playing the Sabbat, you're playing the villain. That's that. Nobody's walking in and going, I'm the good guy, except for the concept of, we're saving the world for the antediluvians. Not for people, though. You're saving it for yourself. So you're playing the villain. And I love the fact that it's like, their mission, whatever other packs are doing, but better, more vicious, and with greater style. This brings to mind, what is the difference between a villain and a supervillain? Presentation! Thank you, Megamind. That is freaking hilarious. I love the idea of the Sabbat who has gone, I am a vampire, I am a knight, and I am going to tear the crap out of some stuff right now. Moving on to Bishop. Oh, we got higher. Yes, we do have higher people. So, and this is Path, Power, and the Inner Voice. What does it say about the Bishop? The Bishop has it good. Set up in the 19th century Neo-Georgian townhouse belonging to a flunky of the previous administration, the 4 high-rise floors belong to the previous prince, are still being sanitized. They now communicate only with and through their chosen presi, competent members of their pack who also have a self-preservation instinct to know their place. But with the increased presence of unmarked vans and rumors of another pack of unifiers muscling in, a new crusade will soon be required. Dominate, potence, presence, awesome. I gotta point something out here though. Check this out. But with the increased presence of unmarked vans and rumors of another pack of unifiers muscling in, a new crusade will be required. Dude, that's a player character setup right there, in my opinion. I really do think I also like the fact that they basically are saying that they've become too powerful to consider themselves on the same level as their pack. The idea that a priest, who is now the leader of a pack, maybe you've trained a replacement, or you just tell your pack to not bother you unless they need something that's vitally important. And I like the fact that they do mention the presi here, because the presi were always the advisors to archbishops and bishops. They were kind of on a higher rung, separated from the standard pack ideal. Because if you stop and think about it, even Sachapaikos was a presi before she or it became Archbishop of Washington, D.C., and then decided to just say, screw it, I got the job, but I'm not doing it. But the idea of them utilizing Prisi, now that the whole structure of Sabbat leadership has fallen down, any vampire who is strong enough to go, I'm stepping away from my pack because I think that I'm better without them, could claim the right to be bishop, and whoever is their trusted member who's willing to do gopher activities would be marked as a Prisi. That is so freaking cool. And it brings a lot of ideas to my mind, but that so sounds like a player character interaction. Now we got the Flotsam and Jetsam, which is basically the leftover stuff. Sabbat and hangarounds. Very often when vampires of other sects get wind of the Sabbat presence, these are the kinds of vampires responsible. So this is going to be our idiots right here. They might be shovelheads, too humane to tread a path and left behind, if not simply malcontents labeling themselves Sabbat for imagined street cred. These fools usually pay the price for their presumption, struck down by wet workers, loyal to the domain rulers, or by mortal vampire hunters with their ear to the ground. In rare cases that they eventually come face to face with the real thing, these Sabbat are usually the first to flee. And then under discipline, celerity, potence, presence. Oh, it's a brouhaha. Oh, that's mean. Anyway, why would you do that? So that is a neat way of pointing out that not all Sabbat are good at being Sabbat. These are your false Sabbat, the Sabbat who have not gone through the creation rites. Because guess what? The shovel party is not a creation rite. It's a quick and dirty way to gain cannon fodder, and if they die, they die. They're not real vampires anyway. Screw them. But the creation rites are an important thing, and when you've gone through them, when you've proven that you can work with the Sabbat and your brain has been appropriately Windexed, then you can be allowed in the club. So we have the Path of the Sun heliophile. The heliophile knows they are chosen, embracing the sombros existence of their thin blood nature. They skirt the edge of vampire and mortal existence, belonging in neither, but believing themselves superior to both. They hide their sun-inflicted burns under designer clothes and sport sunglasses day and night, both as an irreverent accessory and to hide the one blemish no blood will ever mend: eyes bloodshot and pitted from daylight and insomnia. The heliophile burns the candle at both ends, and neither day nor night brings rest. Oh, this guy doesn't sleep ever. That sucks. That poor guy. The Fortitude 2, Thin Blood Alchemy 3. That is, oh, poor dude. Poor dude. I can see that. The Unbirthed. Thin bloods rarely last in the Black Hand. Too weak initially to survive the fierce crucible of crusades, path rivalries, and the ongoing Gehenna War. They're always among the first undead casualties. Nevertheless, necromantist practitioners have managed to weaponize the phenomenon. By performing a charnel ritual atop a mass grave, tearing a sacrificial fledgling asunder in the process, the buried are brought to a semblance of unlife as the vitae infuses their bodies. When the sun sets, the crazed, half-living cadavers dig themselves out, their decaying minds ravaged by hunger, and descend upon anything living in the area. Lacking most self-preservation instincts, they rampage heedlessly until sunrise. Oh my god! So the unbirthed are literally the products of a ritual. They're not even really vampires. They have no humanity at that point. No, and what I mean by that is they have no true humanity. Like, they have no sense of self. I wouldn't even give them 3 willpower on this one. It says that they are effectively thin bloods. These poor creatures are embraced well past their neurological expiration, but some retain traces of memory and personal traits. Depending on circumstances of the ritual, they can lie dormant and preserved for months or even years before some accursed circumstance causes them to rise. The sorcery that animates their already dead bodies also accelerates the destruction of the cadavers once slain by the sun or violence. So in other words, these are your classic mindless movie vampires who ash when they die. This is so cool. It'd be really, really neat if they all had stake to ash. Like that. There's a flaw where when you get staked, you actually just die. It'd be so cool if they had that. That is neat. That is cool. I can definitely see that being a thing as a plot line, because this seems like a way to create time bombs. Shackled. Walking vortices of spiritual ruin. The shackled are ghouls, subjected to horrifying rituals that make them into walking spectral anchors. Their entire bodies scarred, branded, and tattooed with potent sigils. They're constantly surrounded by vengeful specters, the ghost feeding off the ghoul's life force as they mercilessly wreak havoc on the world around them. These ambulatory weapons of localized destruction are thankfully short-lived, as they age rapidly once their ghostly host is unleashed. The shackled are... I gotta read the notes on these things. They're so weird. The shackled are usually dressed from head to toe to conceal their scarred bodies, whether in their own shrouds to be or whatever can keep them temporarily unnoticed as part of a catastrophe in the making. Conditioned to the point of mindlessness, they will make their way to the target location before unleashing the specters bound within. Traits in parentheses: exceptional dice pools and discipline equivalents active at this point. Once loose, the specter will attack anyone and everything around them with invisible talons or poltergeist phenomenon, but will prioritize protecting the shackled as they are their anchor to the world. Disciplines represent these powers. The shackled ages visibly from this point on, dying from accelerated old age in roughly an hour unless they're killed or rent asunder by unbound ghost furies first. Holy crap. Dude, did I fall into the rituals section? No, we're still on the weird stuff. Holy crap. The flesh-welled ghouls. Things are not like they used to be. While the Sabbat made ample use of grotesque monstrosities in centuries past, time has made these siege weapons practically obsolete. Where a multi-jawed, 3-meter, spider-limbed juggernaut made sense when assaulting in noble mains, modern technology is distinctly effective in turning them into awful. They may literally have been seen a mile away, being a very definition of indiscreet. Look at this guy. I like it. At first, it kind of looks like this dude's hugging onto him, but I'm pretty sure he's actually just another portion of this thing, because I'm seeing a head here, kind of see a head here. I don't know if you can even see where my cursor is. It's so dark on this point. Holy crap. This thing's neat. To address this problem, Sabbat necromists have been busy using methods derived from Tzimisce flesh crafting and the remains of a now defunct vampire bloodline. They have brought forth flesh-weld ghouls. Oh, a now defunct vampire bloodline. We are specifically talking about the Blood Brothers here. That's sad. Each group or clutch of these consists of a number of highly conditioned ghouls able to merge their bodies into a single monstrosities reminiscent of the medieval void. The transformation is quick but not reversible. And the clutch usually waits until it's right upon its prey to maximize the element of terror and surprise. Once merged, the flesh-weld monstrosity tears through its victims like a red hurricane. It continues existence, hinging on consuming mortal flesh and vampiric vitae. Dude, okay, so this thing is like a void that makes itself. Jesus. So the clutch ghoul. Each flesh-weld clutch number 3 to a dozen members. Clutch ghouls are no longer thinking people so much as instruments molded to a single purpose. They usually appear completely inconspicuous, their task being to get as close as possible to their target before transforming, and thus are well suited to infiltration or flash mob style mayhem. Individual ghouls of a flesh-weld clutch are eerily similar to each other, though certain groups are tailored to provide specific raw materials to the flesh-weld form, in which one member provides the bulk of the flesh, another a whipcord muscles, and so on. In all cases, clutch members share a certain impatience, aching for a final union that will provide the climax and meaning to their abused existence. Okay, so these things are literally mortal blood brothers who can come together once in a sanguine mass of destruction, and then they just die. Holy crap. Alright, so then we have the clutch welded form. So those were the individual goals. This is the thing that it creates. Towering over men, flesh-welded form is a rapturous zenith of the clutch. Driven by an insatiable hunger for flesh and vitae alike, it burns through the reserves of its physique at an alarming rate, expiring in minutes if it is unable to sate its ravaging hunger. Most flesh-welded forms resemble many-limbed giants, their heads lolling in all directions or fused into a multi-jawed, leering visage, but larger clutches have been known to form stranger and ultimately alien amalgams of flesh, bone, and teeth. Disciplines. Protean, fortitude, or potence, protean, and fortitude. These guys are literally time bomb voids. Ugh. It's disturbing, but it's amazing at the same time. I'm so glad I didn't sleep like I was supposed to. Alright, so we've got some gifts of Cain. We have some new disciplines here. The gifts of Cain take a unique cast when wielded by members of the Black Hand, for no sect so readily invokes the power of the blood as does the Sabbat. Where lesser kindred shy away from what they deem over-reliance on disciplines, Cainites actively prefer to engage them, seeing in them the advantages deliberately bestowed by the Dark Father. I love the idea of disciplines being devotions to your religion. I did see this note that I kind of want to read. Note that some of the systems of these disciplines will see use only if employed by a player character. For example, the stains vampires acquires when using Reclamation of Vitae don't affect Sabbat vampires because paths don't have values that are tracked the way humanity is. Awesome. Cool. Neat. So I just want to do an overview on these. I don't want to go too detailed on these, primarily because I do want to do a video specifically on these Sabbat disciplines later on. So we have Auspex, Level 2, Unerring Pursuit, Dominate, Amalgam 1. So this right here, in my opinion, Auspex and Dominate, we're probably looking at Malkavian rival things. Locking eyes with the subject, vampire coaxes supernatural bond between themselves and the victim. Okay, so you just grab onto a person. I don't want to go too far into this, but I'm so curious at the same time. Level 3 Animalism, Scent of the Prey. The mind-numbing fear of realizing one's role as prey is unique. The vampires versed in sensing the beast can learn to recognize it in those who experience it. This power allows a vampire to become aware of any mortal in the area, projecting the distinct note of fear produced by prey animals. Oh, cool. So you can actually smell people's fear on that. That is pretty freaking cool. I like that. And also, another level 3. That's neat. I don't know if that would give you... Ooh! Dominate level 4. Tabula Rasa. Less memory manipulation than eradication. This callous power does away with subtlety and wipes every trace of memory from a victim, leaving them a pliant effigy of themselves. Oh ho ho! Ah! I got... Obfuscate 3. Mask of Isolation. Mask of 1,000 Faces. Subtle but effective, this power forces the effect of Mask of 1,000 Faces on an unwitting subject. The victim will no longer be seen for whom they are, even by those closest to them. Okay, I'm going to stop reading that. That right there seems very much like Smiling Jack's trick. If anybody remembers that from the old Anarch book, Smiling Jack's trick was you make yourself look like the person that you're casting it on, and they look like you, so that anybody who is helping them would attack them, and you can just walk away scot-free. This kind of seems like a V5 cleaned up version of that. Cannot wait to read through that one later. And then, oh, look at that. Look at that picture. I've shown this before. I love this picture. This is Visceral Absorption. We actually went through this already when I did the preview of this book already. And the idea basically is you can clean up crime scenes. You liquefy corpses and you suck in all traces of viscera and blood into yourself. Awesome power. It's a lot of fun. Level 4, Ambrose Clutch. The user creates a temporary gate out of the victim's own shadow, using them to fall through Oblivion and into the waiting arms of the user. The victim will appear to fall into their own shadow, only to appear falling out of the one cast by the user. The brief journey through the end of everything is usually enough to traumatize the victim into submission, though one must be prepared if the query responds violently in fear. That's neat. So it's basically Portal. The idea of I'm going to, you're going to fall into your own shadow, and I'm going to create a shadow up there. So that's neat. That's a good traumatizing power. Very Sabbat. I like that one. Blood Sorcery Level 3, Transitive Bond. The user is able to extend the blood bonding properties of their vitae, enabling it to retain its ensnaring properties when stored, or even when present in the body of a ghoul. Anyone drinking the stored vitae or from the ghoul will be affected just as if they've imbibed it directly from the user's wrist, developed by the Tremere in a failed attempt to alleviate their bane. The power has resurfaced in the Sabbat, where the discipline is less limited by clan lineage and has been used to great effect in some of their longer schemes. Good job, Tremere. No, that is pretty cool. That kind of does have conflict with one of my house rules, but not really at the same time, because we basically made it so that you can vampire blood stays good for about an hour out of it, just because we wanted to be able to play with blood bonds and stuff like that in the game. But you can, this basically would hold it indefinitely with that. It almost works like the idea of preservation of vitae in the older systems. Oh my god. Okay, so then we have level 5, which is another blood sorcery, reclamation of vitae. No matter the distance, blood calls to blood. Working on the principles, this power allows a vampire to reclaim blood that has been yielded to create ghouls, reclaiming that which has been given regardless of where they are. Ghouls of the vampire will find life-giving vitae in their veins, rebelling within them, returning through mystical means to its source, while their bodies suffer catastrophic damage. Sabbat elders have been known to keep ghouls for the purpose. An emergency reserve available anytime at the trifling cost of mortal lives. That's pretty messed up, and I can understand where Stains would come from with that. But yeah, that's fun. Oh, you think I'm out of blood? No, that's fun. Rituals. Level 1, Beelzebubit. Beelzebubit? I don't know. This ritual causes lower order living creatures to find the ritual area repellent. Animals avoid the area, vermin scuttle away from it, and even plants may take on a pitiful appearance. Used as a low-level precaution against animal spies, this ritual also prevents infestation of sorts of creatures who would be drawn to gore, carrion, and other sorts of remains. That's neat. That's neat, because like I'm sitting there reading this and I'm like, why would anybody care about that? But the ability to keep animal spies from going into the area for privacy makes a lot of sense. It's almost as if they found a way to harness the old flaw aura of corruption, or yeah, I think it was called aura corruption. So that's really neat. They've been able to basically harness the flaw to use it to their own benefit. That's neat. Then we have communal vigor. Based on sanguinary properties similar to the Vauldery, this ritual allows a pack priest to share their blood potency with their pack, while strengthening their own ability to keep those pack mates in line. So blood bond and strength. It's almost like a blood of potency elixir kind of thing that's going to cause them to be stronger. Very cool. That's very neat. I cannot wait to get into that. Let's see. Galvanic ruination. This ritual violently disrupts electrical currents in the area, shorting out or fusing all wiring in the vicinity. Used to kill alarms, surveillance, and artificial lighting. The element of stealth is often short-lived, as collateral damage in the form of fires usually follows. Many Sabbat packs consider this less a flaw than a feature, though. I can see that. That is very, very fun. You're just destroying the way a building works. That's fun. Simulacrum Gates. A time-consuming and elaborate ritual. This colossal undertaking allows the construction of a distance-defying portal, allowing multiple vampires to cross vast distances in mere moments. While only one instance is known so far, blood sorcerers of the Sabbat suspect that it is only a matter of time before they may construct more as a means to perform devastating hit-and-run attacks in the heart of a rival sect's domain. I am very, very interested in this one. That sounds very cool. It kind of reminds me of Walk the Abyss scrolls and thaumaturgy power of Walk the Abyss in the Vampire the Masquerade Redemption video game, which was just like something you could learn. It was just one of those things where, oh, I'm going to take this so I can return to my haven. Obviously, a lot more vindictive and darker purposes, but that is very cool. We are on ceremonies, which is, are we dealing with Sabbat? No, this is Oblivion ceremonies. Blinding the alloy eye. You need Shadowcast for this. Oh, so this is Oblivion La Sombra. This is almost abyssal mysticism. Ooh. Striking a pact with a death spirit, the caster buys themselves a short time of immunity to surveillance as the otherworldly entities scramble cameras around the vampire. Very neat. Very cool. Harrow Haunt. Some places seem haunted, rising the hackles of mortals and vampires alike. A place harrow haunted is in a different league. Places subjected to this ceremony convey a sense of such miasmic dread that most breathing creatures find it hard to, well, breathe, let alone stay. Sabbat vampires often use this to discourage unwanted visitors from lingering in the proximity of their communal havens. While it won't scare away encroaching vampires, most mortals will unconsciously take the long road around it, or make up excuses for why they'll check up on the rumors surrounding the place tomorrow, probably. That's neat. And this is definitely a necromantic version of Oblivion here, because it does say Aura of Decay is needed. This is almost like the human equivalent of that other one to keep animals out of your area, so that's neat. Befoul Vessel. While many of the entropic effects of Oblivion are restricted to mortals, this ceremony allows the wielder to infect the blood of a vessel, making an otherwise unhealthy appearing mortal into a pure poison to the children of Cain. You need Necrotic Touch. That's pretty cool. Poison the drinking water. Oh, and then we got, look at this, Thin Blood Alchemy for the Sabbat. That's awesome. Portable Shade, or even the more irrelevantly suntan lotion, is a formula developed by Cainites on the path of the sun to augment a thin blood's already substantial resistance to sunlight to near mortal levels. While it doesn't render the subject completely immune, it extends the time they can endure daylight while masking immediate burns sustained by the sun. Neat. So, there's a tongue in a jar. On-demand sunburn. That's awesome. A dread tool of the path of the sun, on-demand sunburn traps sunlight in the very body of its user, enabling them to unleash it as a destructive force through their own skin, searing themselves and their prey in a sizzling embrace. While the damage done by a single user is not enough to incinerate a vampire, a group of self-immolating heliophiles can spell doom for fledglings and elders alike. That is screwed up. The idea of, I am a solar panel, I'm going to absorb all this stuff, and then I'm going to give you a nice big hug, is hilarious to me. Here we go. Retes, Cain. Keys to the Dominion of Cain. So, I don't want to read all of this, but I do want to see what they have available. We've got the Vauldery. Very interested in the Vauldery here. We are going to do more intense looks in on these rituals, but I am very interested in what this has to say. The Vauldery is the most infamous of the Sabbat rituals and the secret that allows the sect to emerge from the original Anarch revolt as such a powerful and cohesive force. The Vauldery is part blood sorcery, part artifice, and arguably the heart of the Sabbat. To perform the Vauldery, packs ritually spill their blood into a common vessel and then imbibe the mixed result under the guidance of their priest. Within the Vauldery chalice, the Pax Vitae is imbued with the power to allow them to simultaneously sever their past blood bonds and form new ones among each other. Here, the observance varies wildly, with some packs favoring ostentatious chalices and Latin chants, while others prefer a bear's skull or a lucky whiskey bottle as a vessel, and a few lines of doggerel or street prayer as an invocation. Although initially weaker than the blood bond, these bonds among the pack, known as vincula, can grow over time and make individual Sabbat resilience to betraying their packmates, as their personal loyalty to their pack is girded by the supernatural power of the blood. I think that's a really good description on that one. I'm wondering if they do not have rules for it, which sucks. In stories, the Vauldery is an extremely powerful ritus in terms of storytelling, in that it erases any question as to who the coterie might be dealing with. The player's coterie may discover a rival coterie to be a Sabbat pack as they witness its Cainites sharing blood from a styrofoam cooler poured down the barrel of a hunting rifle. Players may also be forced to participate in the Vauldery if their situation is so dire that they find themselves Sabbat captives. It's also an opportunity to seed fear and doubt. Does a single Vauldery break a blood bond? Or does it take 3 consecutive observances of iniquity to form? The truth varies by the story the troop is telling, but this powerful aspect of Sabbat identity should always leave the coterie questioning how they've been affected by it, even if they haven't partaken directly. And once they've seen the Vauldery happen, they may well question if any other kindred in their domain might have participated. That's very, very cool. I like the fact that it's leaving the specifics open to storyteller and player use. I think if I was to use this in a game for a coterie, I'd probably go back to old rules on it, where everybody writes down their character's name on a piece of paper for how many blood traits they're putting in the Vauldery and throws it in the cup, and then everybody gets a rating of 1 to everybody, but your rating for who you get more of increases it. That is something I would probably do. Obviously, the priest who's performing puts more blood in than anybody else. But this is like the gateway to brainwashing for the Sabbat. It's very, very interesting, especially since it's a stolen Khaldun ritual, technically. Creation rites. The acts of creating new vampire has specific significance within the Sabbat, as its supremacist beliefs have elevated the embrace to a high honor. The creation rites are a hellish series of torments designed to simultaneously strip the fledgling of their humanity, conditioning them to rely on their beasts for survival, and, most importantly, prepare them to take the first steps onto one of the Sabbat's paths of enlightenment. See, this is what I was talking about before. A lot of vampires in the Sabbat are created during shovel parties. That is 100% true, but a lot of the shovel party victims don't actually survive. They run off, they frenzy and die. It doesn't last long for them. But if they come back, they might be subject to the creation rites. Or if they're embraced just because the potential sire had inclination to embrace them and wanted them in there, then they're going to go through the creation rites. And I like the fact that it says that they are a series of hellish torments, because you are trying to peel down the humanity, take away their self, and turn them into another Sabbat. Brother and sister of the Sword of Cain. It's got a thing on here on Sabbat names. From the moment of the embrace through the creation rites, the fledgling Cainite quickly learns that their mortal life is done, setting aside the horrors and becoming undead. The recruit loses their old name, in that their new packmates often quickly bestow upon them some unpleasant nickname intended to bully them into compliance and break down any lingering sense of self. Names like Tatterface, Fucko, Scatterguts, Chunks, and You with the Missing Eye have found use. Hey, You with the Missing Eye. Dude, you've known me for like 8 years. Hey, You with the Missing Eye. That's fun. This is definitely something that could be a lot of fun to interact with in a game. Monomancy, blood duels. It's when two Sabbat are in fighting. So that's cool that it's used here. It could be used in stories. The Blood Feast. The ritus of the Blood Feast, assembled Sabbat gorge upon a great number of mortal vessels who have been kidnapped for the purpose of slaking the Cainites' thirst. Typically that is used before a battle or in a honoring ritual. So that is very cool that that's in here. Is there anything else? Festival of the Dead. This is important. Festival of the Dead was one of the major Sabbat holidays. Like, one of the only Sabbat holidays I could think of. So if the entire structure of the Sabbat's leadership has fallen, what exactly does that give us in terms of participation in sect events? So I do want to read this one. The Festival of the Dead, sometimes called the Festivo della Estino, commemorates the Sabbat's fallen comrades, and for some pacts, the original sacrifices of the Anarch Revolt. Tonight, it also doubles as an occasion to reflect on the dangers of the First and Second Inquisition, and the terrible losses that both have inflicted on the children of Cain beyond remembrance. Many Cainites also see the festival as an auspicious time to settle unfinished business and to initiate revenge against non-Sabbat. This ritus often coincides with similar local or cultural holidays themed upon remembrance of the dead. It is generally a solemn affair, even when observed by righteous pacts, accompanied by various accoutrements, such as incense, candles, grave shrouds, and any religious iconography the pact may have appropriated, or to which may even feel genuine attachment or revulsion. Pacts may go over the top in the grand Gothic fashion, convening in a cemetery and harrowing any mortal onlookers. Or they may revisit the places where the packmates have fallen, such as a skid row pothole or a high-rise penthouse, generally heedless of anyone who might think they have more claim to the location. Okay, well that's very interesting. The Festival of the Dead, or the Festival della Estino, used to be the Dia de Muertos, used to be the Mexican Day of the Dead, primarily because the Sabbat capital was Mexico City. And there was a lot of Spanish heritage mixed in with the Sabbat. And that was actually one of the things that brought them a lot of human trappings. Where they were violent and disagreeable, obviously, they still had that Catholic heritage kind of thing going for them, regardless of anything else, because the practice of the Sabbat were meant to be an insult to Catholics, but while doing it, it still felt like it it meant it bled into actual religious practices for them. Now, the thought that they probably got rid of that because they didn't want to be insulting to people is probably a huge thing. But I do like the way that they did the Festival of the Dead for this. Moving on. Fire dance. All vampires rightly fear fire, as its flames are potent to them. The fire dance not only forces Cainites to face their fear, but it shows their bravery to their packmates, instilling respect among them. The fire dance rites have always been very interesting. They jump over fire. It's a lot of fun. Like, I'm sorry, I've participated in a lot of LARPs where we've actually done the fire dances and the fire jumps, and although it's not the safest thing in the world, it was a lot of fun, and it was a bonding experience, strangely enough. Our packs were very special to us. The Bloodbath. When Sabbat claim titles or positions of power beyond their pack, such as a bishop, the grand rite of the Bloodbath honors a taking rank. Now, there are two meanings to the original Bloodbath, and again, we will do I know I've said this several times. We will do a video specifically focusing on the writing of the Sabbat. But the Bloodbath was of two things. There was we are honoring the vampire who we are giving the honor of leadership to by bathing them in blood. They'd literally sit in like a big bath and they would have blood dumped on them. And it held two meanings. It was, one, if you fail at your job, we will kill you, and it will be messier than this. And the other one is, if you fail me as your newly appointed leader, I will bathe in your blood. So this has a double meaning. It always has. I think it's really cool. I can't wait to go deeper in on this, but very interesting. Then we have the War Party. As the Gehenna War rages, this ritus in particular has acquired a newfound prominence within the Sabbat. The War Party celebrates the pursuit and destruction of their enemies of the Black Hand, and the Gehenna War all but ensures every enemy is a great enemy of the Sabbat. So this is literally just like ramping up for the party. Also, it's a good planning session. So that is a thing. Moving on to the Wild Hunt. The Wild Hunt literally is the blood hunt for the Sabbat. It always has been. The Wild Hunt is a demand for vengeance, and priests invoke this rite when an enemy of the Black Hand has taken an action that demands symbolic and final retribution. Technically, anyone might be the subject of a Wild Hunt, but the pack priest tends to reserve this vengeful fate to a particularly hated foe, or the unthinkable if a member of the pack has turned traitor. I have never seen the idea of a blood hunt being used on somebody not in the Sabbat. But again, I mean, it's a game of instinct, right? It's time for us to go out and hunt something down. So there's no reason why not to. If anything, the Wild Hunt seems like a smaller version of a war party. Then we have the lapsing Octorius Rites. In nights past, the Sabbat observed as many as 13 Octorius Rites, but the rapid splintering and decentralization of the sect has forced many of these universal high rites to extremely colloquial interpretations. Okay, so things that are losing. The binding, the most apt case of universal rite yielding to emergent locality. The binding is an oath of loyalty to the sect and all brothers and sisters of Cain. Modern expressions of the binding are very regional. Okay, so basically it's a swear to fealty and an oath of allegiance to the Sabbat, probably done after you finish the creation rites. We hereby commit our blood and bodies to the Dark Father and all our brothers and sisters in Cain. Woe to they who are about to be vanquished in the name of Cain. We are the sword of the Dark Father. Fuck all of y'all. Here we come. On 3. 1, 2, 3. I love that. I love how that's written. That's actually kind of interesting because you could actually take that, obviously, like one of them, as here is your touchstone for the game. The idea of your anchor being a vampire who particularly represents this quality. Maybe the priest. Maybe your pack priest is the person who you've taken as a touchstone, and then here's one of your. I really want to see that on somebody's character sheet at some point as a tenant. Fuck y'all. Here we come. On 3. 1, 2, 3. Games of Instinct. Games of Instinct are just fun. Similarly yielded to demonstrate the aptitudes and proclivities of individual packs, Games of Instincts are exhibited of sport that allow vampires to mitigate stress and cooperate some gratuitously cruel and solidarity building activities. So there's going to be some here. Demolition derbies, packs set fire to cars with captive passengers and crash into the path to make scars. These are all fun examples. Boarding party, the pack violently and forcibly commandeers a boat, tractor trailer, or aircraft. Sometimes even use it to go somewhere afterwards, but killing the crew is usually the point of the game. Dog tagging. The pack hunts a lupine with an intent of tagging its ear and turning it loose. That's dumb. That's how you get hunted on your sheet. Pandering. While intruding upon other sects' domains, the pack seizes upon a runt or other outsider kindred society, making no secret to their pursuit of the victim with a specific intent of terrorizing them. This game almost always ends in diablerie as the pack calls the weak kindred from the domain. Okay, so these are all fun. In my time playing and running in Sabbat games, we did like bowling. Sabbat bowling was strapping a large appliance like a refrigerator or a washing machine or something like that to the hood of your car with like loose straps and bungee cords and stuff like that, and then driving recklessly down the road until you saw a group of people or kindred if you were lucky, and then you hit the brakes and see if you can hit them with the flying appliance, and then you have to pick up the spare with the car. Then if there were multiple packs in the city, there was always Capture the Ductus, which we didn't always tell the other pack that someone was starting, where you actually had to kidnap the pack leader of the other pack. And we never killed the other person unless, like, well, okay, there was one occasion. But, like, the point was not to kill him. It was just basically to start shit between two packs. It was fun. And a lot of the times they just ended up kidnapping our pack leader in response. Which ended up in the vampire equivalent of a water balloon fight, which you guys can use your own imaginations. I'm not getting into that. There's the Sermons of Cain. Historically, this was always just the reading of the Book of Nod, very much like a sermon in a church. The Palagrand. The Palagrand was often expressed as a high pageantry dance of the dead in mockery of the Camarilla court formally. As Sabbat numbers have dwindled, the Sabbat domains have been largely abandoned and has fallen out of use. That's sad. That is sad because that was a fun thing to do. Let's see, and then we get to the Noglius Rites. The lesser rite observed by the Sword of Cain are informal rituals that vary greatly to pack identity, but often have similar themes depending on the pack's history, geographic location, and especially the path of enlightenment guides them. Packs consist of vampires who share the same beliefs, and even those that have different perspectives within their ranks tend to echo the doctrine established by their pack priest. Okay, so that's interesting. That kind of does suggest that you can be multiple paths of enlightenment. And I can see that happening if like somebody loses their pack in like a raid or something like that, and they need to basically like huddle into another group just for survival reasons. Lesser rite are almost never performed with other packs. So these are pack specific rituals. And there are Path of Cain rituals, the common rite, alternate states of consciousness, Nodus Rite, blah 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 blah. Okay. So that's really neat, and that is stuff that I will go over when we cover the paths. But just to look at it, we've got coronation rites. Sorry, the rites of contrition, hunting rites, and then we got Path of Cathari here, common rites, contrition rites, hunting rites. Okay, so they're all pretty much going to be the same, but they're going to be path directed. So, oh my God, the art in these books is worth the money. I'm sorry, it really is. Like, I love the pictures that are always in these books, and I'm actually very happy to be out of the hard line ink drawings that were in the older versions. I loved them, I really do, but I don't know, the hardline cartoonish stuff just doesn't sit with me as well as these gorgeous pictures. Like the photos and the drawn stuff is so nice. Okay, so here we get into, let's see, in the final nights, the Sabbat is at once an unpredictable hive of clashing orthodoxies and a terrible, relentless monolith. The apocalyptic Gehenna War has crippled its former leadership structure and robbed it of its most potent elders. Almost the entirety of the Black Hand's former domains have been seized by rival sects, even as the Second Inquisition harries the sword of Cain at all turns. Tonight, the Sabbat is smaller than it has been since its foundation, fighting a desperate war against enemy sects, mortal hunters, and the Antediluvians themselves, all of which means tonight's Sabbat has nothing left to lose. I think that's actually just a complete repeat of what I read at the beginning of the book, but it's still so freaking amazingly put in there. This is basically the ins and outs of how your Sabbat is going to work. I think this is more of the idea of how to run storylines with there's conflicting stuff. And we have a section here for the anti-tribute. This is something I want to read because I kind of got the impression, it really seemed to me like the anti-tribute were just going to die out. That calling yourself of a clan, regardless of whether or not you're putting anti-clan in front of it, is still just giving the Antediluvians power over you. So let's see what this has to offer. From the Sabbat perspective, clan is an explicit legacy of influence of the Antediluvians. Without Antediluvians, there are no clans. The Sabbat vampires aim to negate their connection to the despised progenitors. With more nuance, different Antediluvians would have yielded different clans, which perhaps would not have yielded the eternal struggle that makes the Gehenna War necessary, but that's moot. The Black Hand fosters an environment in which the individual clan is rarely acknowledged and never celebrated. Even for the visibly obvious Sabbat Nosferatu, other Sabbat just don't care about that distinction. Where members of the other sects may consider themselves in terms of clan, Sabbat members almost always consider themselves vampire first, Sabbat second, and the follower of their own particular path third. Clan almost never matters to their self-image, thus the philosophy of anti-tribute or anti-clans. On those rare occasions when lineage comes into question, Sabbat appends the word anti-tribute when they name clans, acknowledging the limited extent of its importance. For example, Archbishop Lucita of Madrid, okay, so she is an archbishop, is La Sombra Anti-Tribu, and Sachavikos, the martyr of Cain, is a Tzimisce anti-tribute. Okay, so Lucita and Sacha are specifically Sabbat still. Okay, I was really wondering about Vikos with everything that was going on, whether or not the La Sombra and everything. But now that they're specifically calling themselves anti-tribute, that's very, very interesting. That is very, very interesting. This attitude aids the suppression of individual identity among the Sabbat and helps the sect build a notion of collective accomplishment. Brothers and sisters of Cain, the Sabbat has no need for internal social constructs that sow division. The idea of anti-tribute is also part of what makes the Sword of Cain so alien to kindred outside the sects. They find the Sabbat hive unrelatable, with little sense of self and none of lineage. That is so cool. I like the idea. It's so weird to consider the idea of the La Sombra and the Tzimisce being considered anti-tribute, because it was always La Sombra and Tzimisce, everybody else is anti-tribute, because the La Sombra and the Tzimisce are said to have killed their antediluvians. But we know for a fact that the Tzimisce antediluvian just keeps coming back, and the La Sombra antediluvian obviously just came back. So who the hell knows what the hell's going on now? Of course, Sabbat will eagerly exploit rivals' banes, whether inside the sect or without, or credit aptitude with certain disciplines over others, as much as they would prefer it not to be true. These are undeniable properties of the blood. Okay, so my thought process of do not use like the clan to dictate what disciplines you have is not valid on this one. So if you're building a Sabbat character, I would probably say pick a discipline from your parent clan, pick a discipline from your path of enlightenment, and pick a discipline from your predator type. So you've got a nice even spread of those three things. So it's just one extra step to create a vampire from the Sabbat in this so far. In social situations involving the Sabbat and other sects, Cainites make no effort to hide the derision they have for clans, lineage, and any sort of expressed pride or identity that accompanies them. They spit on the suggestion of fealty to such wretched origins. They curse the despicable families that emerged from founders who turned their backs on the Dark Father. Black Hand converts from other sects may react with especial vitriol to make the point of having turned away from what they once were, often as much to convince themselves of the correctness of their choice as any actual antipathy for clan, until an adopted path relieves them of any lingering doubt, of course. So that actually kind of fits in with the idea that the paths are there to help brainwash. Unsurprisingly, this often makes it difficult for Sabbat vampires to hide among other sects. The cultural differences are often so great that would-be Black Hand infiltrators simply don't understand the weight of clans on the society of the Ivory Tower. The Anarchs are generally less concerned with clan lineage, and the Anarchs are especially at risk of harboring Sabbat in their midst. Obviously, that's one of the reasons the sect is so vulnerable to the Black Hand, compared to the lineage-obsessed Camarilla. Which isn't to say that it's immediately obvious that an interloper is Sabbat, especially among creatures of such strange predilections as vampires. Rather, the subtle cues and prompts that other sects kindred respond to, in certain ways, are absent among the Sabbat, creating an almost uncanny valley when matters of clan arises. That's also interesting, the idea that they just don't get it. Like, what's the point? Like, it's a culture shock, and that's something I think was missed in the old ones too. I like the idea of them actually being confused when people talk about clans, and then them having to go, oh yeah, Toreador anti-tribute. Like, the idea of it catching up to them, overriding the individual. Hey, look, we have an entire thing here. on how to brainwash your Sabbat character. And then also going into the conformity of having that. High-ranking Sabbat also carry authority in instructing the pact priest to such sect policy. The hierarchy is mysterious and unknown in many cases. However, in any authority outside the domain or region might be fabricated, look to the bishop or archbishop to guide the priest, and beyond that, who can say with any confidence? So basically what they're saying is it's going to be set on a city by city basis of what you're actual looking at. We're probably not going to be getting the cardinals and the we're probably not going to be getting the cardinals and the regent back of the Sabbat, which is not necessarily a bad thing, because it was one of those things that cultivated authority in the Sabbat that made them way too human after some time. And this is going to go into how to play Sabbat a little bit better. That's really neat. Look at this art. I like how they have the red star in the sky. Sabbat objectives. Nice. Okay, so this is going to go into why things were there. Let's see. Path realities. Adopting a path, changing paths, leaving path. This is all going to be massively important for people who are playing La Sombra, who are joining the Camarilla, if you think about it. A priest responsible for a vampire understanding their path brings them into the group of Cainites also following that path. The pacts. Pacts are devoted not only to one specific path of enlightenment, but also to some larger purpose mandated by a bishop, archbishop, or other leading figure. So that's pretty neat. The idea that you might get an entire city that's based around one path of enlightenment. That's very interesting. All right, so changing paths. It is possible, though exceedingly rare, for Sabbat to change their path of enlightenment after having been inculcated into one. The risk is obvious. The Cainite must again be brought down to the brink of wassail, and then have one of the epiphanies of the new path anchor them to self-control. It's a process few accomplished vampires would court, but for those who see more potential in another path, changing the nature of one's monstrosity may offer them a chance at apotheosis. That's very interesting. I can see somebody who's on path of power and the inner voice using that drive that path gives you to like switch over to Path of Cain because they want to drop, generation or something like that. That's pretty neat. Leaving paths. The notion of leaving paths entirely provokes revulsion from the Sabbat. After all, no true Sabbat would turn their back on the sect to adopt such a feeble attitude of cowering among mortals and pretending to hold their values dear. Sombra, does the wolf secretly yearn to live as a swine? I love that. Doing so is, not to put too much of a fine point on it, excruciating. Not only do all the perils of changing paths apply, but the readoption of mortal Moors often proves irreconcilable for Cainites, who have spent massive amounts of emotional and psychic effort to suborn them in the first place. It is exceedingly likely that most attempts, of which there are likely an exceedingly small number in the first place, simply fail, leaving the Cainite a white or worse. So that is a pretty interesting thing to consider, because that is something that I would consider would be mandatory for a lot of La Sombra joining the Camarilla, or even the Tzimisce. But I really don't see I see the Tzimisce more like taking up an ideal of fake it until you make it kind of situation, where they're still going to be monsters. They're not going to stop anything. So then we have the Sabbat titles. In modern nights, the Sabbat has splintered, with conflicts scattered worldwide and decentralized approach of the eternal struggle. So it does say something here about the regent. The nature of many vampire institutions implies a top-down organization. From neo-feudal Camarilla princes to streetwise anarch barons, the individual figure evokes a supreme authority for that domain, or at least a no bullshit, buck stops here attitude, even if the reality is much more nuanced. However, this is actually true of the hollowed out hierarchy of the Sabbat to an extent. Unlike the other major sects, the Black Hand has a single sect-wide leader known as a regent. In practice, it's not that simple because among the damned, whatever is, indeed, it is currently unknown who the regent of the Sabbat is or where they may be found. In fact, many suspect that the Sabbat has no current regent, that the guerrilla nature of the Gehenna War is best fought without ponderous top-down hierarchy. Others opine that the absence of a single commanding figure illustrates the hive mentality of the Sword of Cain, or that it is not a unified sect fighting deluded crusade, but rather a confederation of wild-eyed, malevolent cults, especially among the Sabbat. The lack of a regent is all they've ever known, which argues that the Sabbat doesn't need a regent, pope, vizier, or any resembling such. Whatever the case, if there is a regent tonight, no one's telling who it is, and the Sabbat has plenty of momentum without them. That is very interesting considering the last regent that we knew about, which was Melinda Galbraith, who was a child of Helena in Chicago. So a very, very powerful Toreador tribute who died. And with that being a thing, was replaced by a 13th generation neonate cross-dressing Tzimisce, who just didn't want to get caught and was pretty much just stuck pretending to be her. And I can imagine that Zachary Zikorsky, being his name, probably took the opportunity to GTFO the moment the beckoning hit. You know, to try to get away from the guards of the regent and escape, because they were trapped in that leadership position for a while. And I'm really, really sure they probably just were able to get on out of there. Now, so moving on out, we have the archbishops and the bishop. Although the Sabbat cares little for the notion of domain, the way the other sects do, it nonetheless sees a value in maintaining various territories for the sake of recruitment and for strategic fallback points. As well, each city claimed and held is one of the toadies of the other sect can't have for their own, which is its own reward. Archbishops and bishops' primary responsibility is maintaining domains to best serve the Gehenna War effort. Now, the way that archbishops and bishops work is there's a council of bishops that run an area, or there is an archbishop who runs an area. Typically, what you're looking at is city by city. There will be a regional archbishop that runs a group of cities as if it was one, and sometimes they have bishops that work under them. That was always the way that we ran it. That's really the only difference is that an archbishop can hold something themselves, while bishops are more of a coalition of elder Sabbat Cainites. Okay, so we have some notable bishops and archbishops. Lucida de Aragon, she's on Path of Night, which I didn't see any mention of in the paths, unfortunately. Madrid is a Camarilla court, or rather, Madrid is a contested domain that would otherwise be Camarilla court, but for the presence of the Archbishop Lucida de Aragon, whose pack is said to be 100 strong. That is a damn big pack. And who still wears her living name in mockery of the Camarilla pride and mortal fear. Complicating matters, certain noteworthy kindred claim that Lucida has met the final death. But if that's true, who are her packmates following? The Path of Night appears to be a variant of the Path of Cathari, and Lucida is its preeminent adherent. That's very interesting comparing Path of Night to Path of Cathari, but I guess I can kind of see it. The Doctor, Path of Power and the Inner Voice. Once the Bishop of Atlanta, Julius Sutphin, was one of the earliest Sabbat to rally to the Gehenna War. As part of the triumvirate of bishops holding the domain of Belgrade, the Doctor is instrumental in moving Cainites through that domain to the war front using his medical credentials. Since taking up his title in Belgrade, he has also become regarded as a wise voice among the followers of Path of Power and the Inner Voice. So he actually keeps his human identity capable so that he can use his status as a doctor to move vampires in and out of the U.S. That's pretty freaking cool. Let's see. We have cicatriz or Kissatriz. I really don't know how to pronounce that. We will see. Path of Cain, the Bishop of Tijuana, is an accomplished commander in the Gehenna War with an undead career of having personally discovered an elder's tomb. Artifacts found in the grave have exposed the resting places of subsequent elders from pre-Columbian era. Under Cicitrit's leadership, if anybody knows how to pronounce that, I'm sorry for butchering that. Please feel free to correct me. The Tijuana domain has become renowned for its monomancy duels, almost an officer's school, from which pack priests emerge as exemplars of the Path of Cain. Their blood made more puissant by Diablerie. That's neat. So I'm guessing these are our archbishops of note here, or our bishops and archbishops of notes. We probably have well, this is Lucida. I'm assuming this is the Doctor, and this is Cicicritz. I feel awful not being able to know his names. I have issues with, obviously, Nosferatu. I have an issue with Nosferatu names in general. Like, is it Celebros? Is it Calibros? I have no idea how to pronounce that Nosferatu's name either. Anyway, so then we have some pack priests. It often surprises outsiders to learn about the existential side of the Sabbat, to realize that the sect isn't just the monstrosity of violence and brutality against mortals. That is nice, and that is a good way to move on to it. And then we have some notable priests. Again, holy, there's so much here. Very, very cool. And then we've got other titles, cardinals. Outbreak of the Gehenna War, those call themselves cardinals, ostentatiously became warlords. The Sword of Cain, counting among them various specialists from the number of different paths and regional factions. A number of unconfirmed Cainites have also assumed the title of cardinal, and these may or may not have formally been accorded these roles by Sabbat luminaries. This is so just flippin' neat. Okay, so here's the other ones. We have the priestess. Every army needs a specialist, and the Sabbat is no exception. While the majority of the sect is devoted to the war, the priestess, the priesti, have emerged as a different aspect of the blasphemy, from spy masters organizing the infiltration of other sects to reconnaissance experts sneaking past the front lines of influence. Counselors and access to the Archbishop, the priesti, are often the minds backing the arm of the Sword of Cain. That is a great description. The Paladars, the Paladins, Templars, these guys were always just basically the archons of the Sabbat. They were typically made such by like archbishops and stuff, so it's pretty interesting that's here. Ductus, here we go. The responsibility of pack leadership were once split between the pack priest, who tended to use the spiritual needs of the pack, and the Ductus, who was the tactical leader. With the urgency of the Gehenna War, however, which is itself a holy war, the distinction between one of little value. Tonight, Ductus is used almost as derisive parlance for the pack priest of little spiritual rigor. Okay, so they do not say that they never existed, but they have been combined into one thing due to the Gehenna War. That is very, very cool. So we're going to get into a lot of other stuff. Holy God, there's so much. I cannot wait to get into all of this. Guys, we are very, very lucky. There's so much information here. We've been going on this for a while. I want to do a story directly on the Gehenna War, so I'm going to kind of go past that. But I mean, look at all the stuff that this is offering. I don't even know where to stop, truthfully, because there's so much stuff here. Mexico City was so freaking important to the Sabbat, and now they don't even have it anymore. I think we have enough here to play Sabbat if we really, really wanted to. There is so much going on here. And, storyteller resources, look at that. There's so much going on here that actually does give us something to think about. This isn't just for antagonists. I mean, it is meant to be. But, like, there is so much in here. Seriously, look at these pictures. There's so much in here on how you can possibly build a proper Sabbat character as well. Delicious. Sorry, I'm getting all lost in this. There's so much in here to help you build a Sabbat character and also convert the paths to playable past the thought of what humanity is. Because, I mean, at that point, you're running strictly off the tenets of your path and not on what humanity makes you. So basically, I would say that you are effectively humanity of one, and then you have your path tenets, and then you can run a path completely fine. You may want to consider how well you can hold yourself together. Okay, we're in index territory now, but still, oh my God, there's freaking pictures in the index. Anyway, I am Voivode Maquette. I cannot wait to have to cut this thing down in editing because this was a journey. But thank you for joining me tonight in this look at the Black Hand, the Sabbat. We have it. It's gorgeous. Thank you, Cainites, for joining me. And I plan on using this book to the full extent of my imagination and not what the authors are saying that it is, because I don't see this as just a storyteller usable thing. I could very well run a Sabbat Chronicle with this, and I cannot compare this to the Camarilla and Anarch guides at all. This book has so much more in it than they do, and it's shorter. We don't have the ramblings of Victoria Ash telling us what we should and should not do as proper Camarilla vampires or anything like that, which I love. I do love that. I love the story involved in that. This gives us visceral lore to run off of, not one Camarilla Toreador's perception of things. So this is a well worth it book in my opinion. It has some amazing powers in it. It has the amazing paths in it. I cannot wait to do a series devoted to the paths of enlightenment, which I will do as soon as I finish the frickin' discipline ones, because I still need to do thin blood alchemy and then all the other disciplines that are inside of this book now, and also the cult of the blood gods. But I'm probably just going to start intermingling things and doing things as I can, because there's so much that I want to touch on. I don't want to be stuck linear past it. I do not want to be stuck as a servant to the pages of a book. But if you are considering whether or not this book was worth the buy, personally, I think it is. This would make a great way to run a plot line, not just as Sabbat as antagonists, but also as the player characters themselves. So, my opinions on things are my opinions on things. I do look forward to hearing all of your opinions on these things too. And I will see you next time in our World of Darkness. Good evening.